Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't extremely excited for today's episode featuring 3 podcast regulars that you all know and love. Introducing human trafficking, SRA, mind control, child assassin, and sex slave survivor and whistleblower, tattoo artist, entrepreneur, and business owner, mother, and podcast host at Carrie Olaje on YouTube, the one and only Carrie Olaje. Introducing also SRA, human trafficking, child assassin, and mind control survivor and whistleblower, father and husband, writer and author of the book Snatched from the Flames, podcast host at Nathan Reynolds on YouTube, content creator, international speaker, and military veteran, the one and only Nathan Reynolds, and top-tier MONARCH Operator, human trafficking, SRA, child assassin, mind control survivor, and whistleblower, entrepreneur, writer, owner and founder of Organized Safety, host of the Gray Area podcast on YouTube, and my true love, the one and only Gray. Part of how I plan on growing and evolving this podcast for season 4 is by getting like-minded people together for panel events that dive into topics that they all have in common. The season 4 premiere event of the Imagination podcast, featuring 50 voices of ritual abuse, was my first go around at this concept, and today's episode is going to kick it up a notch by bringing together 3 young occult survivors and whistleblowers who were all groomed and mind controlled as children through MKUltra Delta programming to be child killers turned deep state political assassins used for black budget operations. Today's show is going to be a rapid fire question and answer format where we will take the questions that all of you submitted, go around the table, giving each guest the opportunity to answer, and then have a group discussion afterwards before moving on to the next question. We will be rotating the order of who answers first and last to give everyone the chance to go first. And we have some incredible questions that were submitted. A huge thank you and shout out to everyone who submitted their inquiries and questions to these 3 amazing heroes and warriors. Before I finish introducing today's podcast panel, I wanted to give a quick reminder that if you are a survivor or whistleblower who wants to share your story on the podcast, or who wants to share any information privately with me, you can now email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com. I'd also love your support on my Substack, where I'm taking up journaling as an outlet for me personally to reflect on the podcast, the guests, and my advocacy work. And you can subscribe to me at www.emmacatherine.substack.com. All of my other social media links are in the show notes also, and I can't thank all of you for your courage to shine a light on the darkness with me and each guest. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming this week's amazing guest panel of honor. Warriors, survivors, overcomers, heroes for the children, voices for the voiceless, and 3 of my absolute favorite humans, Carrie Olaje, Nathan Reynolds, and Gray. You guys, thank you so much for being here with me today. This is the coolest thing ever.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emma.
I'm so excited. So I had put out a couple of feelers, and I know Gray did also, maybe some of you guys did, but we got some really cool questions from you guys. So what I'm going to do is flow through these. We're going to ask one question at a time, and everybody's going to get a chance to answer. We're going to have a little discussion at the end. And we're just going to see how much we can get through. So I'm really excited about this. So for the intro, you guys, I did a very, very, very abbreviated version of who you are. And I'd love to give each of you the chance to speak and give a little bit more information on who you are in case this is somebody's first time meeting you, depending on what platform they find you on. So I'd like to start with Carrie. Carrie, would you go ahead and introduce yourself and give a little background info or sort of an elevator pitch on your story and who you are?
Yeah, my name is Carrie and I'm an alcoholic. No, I am actually, though, like many survivors, I've been in recovery for about a decade now. So as an aside, basically, man, if you were just first like finding out about me, I think I tried to respond to someone that was like, "What's the context of this?" And I was like, I'm basically product of generational incest on both sides of my family. And I was born to a pedophile father who, was a huge fan of snuff porn. And there's a lot of people that I found are not familiar with what that is, which is essentially he had a penchant for watching porn that involved the maiming or killing of, children, animals, or adults, essentially like in the process of, the pornography film, essentially. So, to fuel that habit and his habit for being a pedophile, essentially a known pedophile before I was born, he sold me into a ring of organized crime, essentially of people that produced the content that he wanted more of, essentially. So I'm pretty sure I was assigned to my handler, who was like a top tier military uh, official, essentially, for, I'm pretty sure at birth, basically. And then from there, I was passed around to several handlers who essentially perpetrated abuse that created me to be both a sex slave and working in, pornography, including like bestiality and snuff, as well as using me for assassin type training, which was typically geared more towards other children and helpless, kind of victims, also in those pursuits, and then occult rituals, basically. So that was kind of my long-term role in the cult, was both being used for the sex work, for the main handler, but then also being used for rituals, where I essentially would always have the same role of doing dissection or dismemberment, of bodies and stuff. So, man, I think that's it. I don't know, without getting into, the front life, I guess, that's pretty much the context of most of the horrors, that I'd go over. So
Gray?
next.
Well, I'm Gray. I was born into a generational family, and due to a random set of circumstances, I guess, or perhaps not random, and things such as astrogenetics, I was selected for a pet project, I guess, if you will, and got into a little different side of things than many survivors did. But besides that, unfortunately, I've experienced much of the same, Delta training, desensitization with, cadavers and that end of things, and eventually went into operations under military intelligence and overseeing some of the programs that were involved with that. And much earlier on, I broke away from the family because the generational aspect, there's a heavy, really bloodline cult thing that's going on that's kind of separate from the government stuff, the way I see it. And when I was very young, I had a experience that really made me rebuke that in every way, shape, and form. And so luckily I got away from that a little bit earlier. Of course, it has continuously plagued me to this day and, been around. But I left working with the network considerably later. And I guess, I'm a little bit more private, I guess, in some ways, but much of the same, to where, you know, family was into bad things, and pretty much all survivors are, you know, going to have the incestual, pedophilia, so on and so forth, which is just kind of part of the recipe. But you know, really, my whole outlook at it is, I'm just trying to take the positive of what I went through, which is the knowledge and information of being in this position, to try to use that against it, because it's the most vile, evil, disgusting thing, and it's everything that's wrong with the world. So I appreciate the chance to come here with everybody else, and it's my honor to be here with Carrie and Nathan, who I think very highly of. So thank y'all. I yield back.
Nathan.
Same here.
Oh, I've never been in, I've never got to hear you guys like this, or get to hear it like this. It's quite intense to get to be here with you. Thank you for setting this up, Emma. I don't think I've ever been on a show with other people like this at all in my life, at least not known, or that they were talking about it. So dang. Yeah, my, I was, gosh, I was raised by monsters, you know, period. But you don't know they're monsters until much later in your life. And that's the really, you're born into a house of confusion, and totally depraved from all levels of normalcy and stability and humanity. And my family were participants in a very systematized order, this Brotherhood of the Snake, that was really all about trying to resurrect these ancient gods, in particularity this one of the plumed serpent and this fiery dragon. And they're based out of Lake Havasu City, Arizona, and they were just obsessed with this need to abuse and traumatize children, like just shatter their mind, shatter their will, shatter their hopes and their futures, and any desire or resistance that they ever had towards autonomy, freedom, choice, individuality. All of that just goes into the coffers of this black fire, and they just consume your hope and your future. And so I grew up systemically tortured and traumatized until they had their way with me, and they were through with me, and they spit me out on kind of the rejects pile of revenge. And so I just took up the blade and started stabbing and cutting the throats of every person I could get my hands on that they would let me out to go after. And I certainly believed they were the bad guys, you know, and some of them were definitely the innocents, and that's an absolute nightmare, and you can't escape it. And so that's the stuff that kills your dreams and kills your sleep, and there's no rest for the wicked is a real thing. And when you suddenly become the wicked one in the room, it torments you and shatters your hope of your future and your purpose. And it took me a long time to ever believe that there was a ragged edge worth saving, you know, that there was just anything left in me that was worth redeeming or rescuing. And so it wasn't until later in my life that I got washed out of the military. I got involved in the special access teams in the United States Army, and basically kill teams, you know, hunting down American citizens and butchering them. And, you know, all the legal justification to do so. A license to kill is a very real thing that you can be given, and one that can be revoked. And it got revoked all at once for me, and my entire dreams of what I thought was my purpose and my calling to continue to act violent revenge on monsters the rest of my life came to an end. And my life was tossed into a blender of trying to find who I was. I was a disaster, a dead man walking. I joined all those same AA kind of groups there, Carrie, just like you mentioned. Super drug addicted, alcoholic, psychopathic, you know, lost in my own mind and seeking every way I could to drown out the dreams. And alcohol was a tremendous friend to me for a very, very long time, and a terrible tyrant also. So I got snatched out of that darkness in a very dramatic and sincere way. And you know what? I've got a family and a mission and a calling to try to set the captives free. And you know what? I'm staring at some incredible warriors who truly are opening the gates of these prisoners, and they're loosening the bonds that have been tightly strangling all those cords of bondage that they used to wrap around all of us when we were little. You know what? At the end of the day, it's made us very custom catered to cut those cords and to show people exactly where the knife lies so that they can be set free too. So I'm glad to be here. I'm really humbled to be alive with any of you, and that all of you are alive is a stinking stab right through the eye of these monsters. So thank you for fighting and standing up and being brave, because no matter your level of privacy or anonymity, every one of you puts yourself out here on the front line. You're an absolute warrior, and we need every one of you.
Any feedback from anybody?
I appreciate y'all. You know, I don't want to go too far with what Nathan said, but I identify with that. It definitely resonates with me.
Hell yeah.
This is really, really cool too to have all of you here. I felt whenever I did an interview with the 3 Stanford survivors, it was sort of something similar where they all had something in common, and there's no way that they, they were made to not find each other or even get out, and somehow ended up, uniting and coming together. And it's so neat, and you guys are all so young, it's so neat to see this right now. This is like this is monumental what we're doing here. And there's nobody else I'd rather be doing it with. And it's so cool to see 3 people I care about. You guys all care about each other. And it's like the first time we've all been together, which is crazy.
If I may, I'm a bit overwhelmed at the surprise and just the gravity of it, so I'm a little bit, shocked almost, but I think we're going to open this up, and, I plan to come in here acting reserved, but Nathan, you got me fired up already, and we're going to open up on these. We're going to open up on it.
Light him up.
Let's get it. What are we going into?
It's true. That's all I was going to add. That's all I was going to add to Nathan's, to Nathan's share and everything, and Gray's, it's just really that, that Emma, like you're who we have to thank, for being here and doing something that does feel incredibly, surreal, really, that there would be 3, people, that would be both healing and able to talk out, and everything. And really, but really your podcast is what, what got me here where I'm at. It's still pretty much the main podcast I've done, other than the Wake of the Dead, episodes and everything, that it's, it's you, kind of giving us the platform, bringing it together, because it really feels like, I was thinking about that today. I was like, if a year ago, I would have thought, I would have never imagine, what I mean, that I would have both felt empowered to speak, have been embraced by so many amazing people in the community with so much like love, but then also to find like I can't tell you how cathartic it is to be able to like I said, for my own personal story, if someone hasn't like listened to it, I like had a really long, one of my main training sessions was with 2 other boys, that were being trained in the exact same way. So I kind of can almost like visualize that it's like, it's like, like the pack being set free or something like that. And that's what I've always visualized for those other boys in my memory, essentially, is that one day they could be, where we're sitting here, that there's so many kids that have gone through what we've gone through, and just to know, to how, like you were saying, how epic, monumental, like it is really kind of almost shocking, just to know that it's happening, that just this is a thing is happening, and it's going to be, helpful for I know a lot of people that are ready, ready to set those bonds, aside, and to kind of step into their own, their own will and power and heal. So thank you guys.
Oh my gosh, this makes me so happy. I'm so happy that you guys are all here, and I'm really excited to start diving into these questions. So I'm going to ask the first one. So we'll sort of do the same thing, just go around, and then we'll talk about it a little bit at the end. So this question is, if you had the attention of everyone in the world who was asleep to the real world that you all know and have experienced, and you had 5 minutes or so to wake them up, how would you explain the big picture of the world we actually live in? And I'm going to start this one with Gray.
Well, I feel like, well, here's what I do, because unfortunately I do have to run through this with people quite often, and the people that I run this through are typically government, law enforcement, bureaucrats, so on and so forth. And yeah, you got to get it done quick. You know, where do I start off with? The 1995 ACHRE hearings with Valerie Wolf, Claudia Mullen, and Christina Cola. And I start off by giving them a rundown of, you know, World War II, don't even go into funded by both sides. World War II, paperclip, MK Ultra, 95, we have kids coming forward. We have 40 therapists that mobilized in a week and a half when internet and everything, and there's not much coverage, to provide documents, evidence, corroborating testimony from hundreds of survivors nationwide that they, in fact, were trained as child assassins, sex slaves, espionage assets, so on and so forth, sleeper agents, and waking sleeper agents as well, you know. So, and then, so I basically show them the testimony where Valerie Wolf breaks down how, you know, in a week and a half, almost 40 therapists reached out to her, how they have the documentation, so on and so forth. And then, you know, I show them a few things. You guys, if anybody's familiar with me, you know what I show is I then show Persinger talking about the helmet and exactly how it works, and, you know, that type of stuff. I mean, I really keep it super down to earth. Then once it's that, I say, look, you know, just like Eisenhower warned, military industrial intelligence, you know, agriculture, complex has got out of control and they're doing very horrible things. That's where I come from, and I've seen it firsthand, let alone this. What do you think happened with all this? You know, it's still going on. It's horrible. It's out of control. It's everything that's wrong with the world. I usually lead in with that. I don't start off by saying these people actually take their orders from spirits. I don't start with that. Or, you know, these people are actually believe in some of this crap, you know. That's not what I lead with. I stick to the very down to earth things. The rest doesn't matter. You got some people that are out of control doing things that are documented and verified. It's continuing. We need to get at it now. Yesterday stat. I yield back.
Nathan.
Bro, that's salty. That was some sweet savage slinging it, man. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. It's all about tactics. At the end of the day, every one of us has an opportunity to share, whether it's a tiny little infinitesimally small amount of time, but we sooner or later get those opportunities to get our licks in. And you know what? That was very, very well articulated in an incredibly efficient manner. So add it to the pile of incredible ways of approaching this. But you know, if I had 5 minutes to share with the world an opportunity of trying to wake them from their sleep and slumber, you know, I think at the end of the day, the most powerful tool that I'm ever going to have is that of my testimony, you know. And I do know radical intelligent evil puts on human skin suits every single day, and they look like ordinary people, and they intentionally prey upon the most innocent and defenseless people, and they have done it from time immemorial, and it is a cult of death. And these people have linked themselves up through the secrecy clause, and a secrecy that binds them through mutual imprecation in order to maintain a order that is absolutely contradictory towards the greater agenda of humanity, which is to live, to thrive, to be fruitful, and to spread out and fill the earth. And instead, this one seeks to gather and control people through a systemic, intentional abuse and compromise. So I grew up in a family that absolutely utilized compromise as a currency. And so the way that they did that was to capture people's futures. And they did it by abusing children and getting them to go along with it. Like you said earlier, Carrie, there is a deep need that these people have for sexual depravity. And at the end of the day, they give themselves over to that lust. And my body became a currency for that kingdom. And they used me as a means to climb the pyramid of power. And you know what? They were climbing their steps to their own demise, because at the end of the day, what they've done is they have drunk from a cup of destruction. And it's inevitable that there are survivors that are going to come crawling out who are the last person remaining. There can be a room full of people. Like, I watched children all around me die. Not once, many times. I watched them be torn apart in front of my face. I watched people consume the life of innocent children all over this country. I watched it happen in Arizona, in New Mexico, in Colorado, in Michigan, in New York, in Georgia, in Virginia. I saw these people's lives get snuffed out over nothing. Over nothing. And you know what? Their names and their faces, they still are there in the darkness for me. I don't forget them. I won't forget them. And as much as they systemically try to blot out people's memories, and as many times as they try to make us sound like we're crazy, you know what? At the end of the day, their names and their faces won't leave me. And they demand justice, and they're continuing to cry out, because that blood cries out day and night. And you know what? Justice is coming, and it will be swift and irreparable. You'll never be able to hide from it. And you know what? I am a living witness against the darkest of nights. And so too are these people that are here right now. And you know what? There's millions more of us who don't know that they have a voice, who don't know that they can stand up in boldness and confidence. But this is what we were made for. We were made to tear this kingdom apart, to absolutely destroy the works of darkness. Because you know what? Boldness, vulnerability, and truth is the true foundations of a house of love. And that is why we are here, because you know what? Perfect love casts out all the fear. And when you have great love for your neighbor, for the people that are around you, like the actual people to your left and to your right, it consumes that doubt. It consumes that despair. It drives away the insanity and the depravity and the need for just something to drown it out. And it fills you with a heart of hope that is absolutely unstoppable. And I've seen survivors of the most capable and absolutely dangerous people on the face of the earth, because you know what? We've been victims for long enough, but you know what? We will absolutely become victors. And when we do that, I assure you of this, we will come and bear forth a testimony that will shut the mouths of every single one of these mockers and scoffers. And it will be showed that their darkness, their sins that they thought they could hide, that they thought they could conceal and cover up, every one of them's been recorded. Every one of them will be accounted. Every one of them will be played in front of the screens of the nations, and they will have to give an account, because it's absolutely unstoppable. The inevitability is that the survivors are coming out of those closets of fear and cowardice, and all of the mind control is breaking off of us, and we are going to most assuredly burn their house to the ground.
Amazing.
Oh yeah.
Gosh, I hope you
Oh,
all on the other end are
like,
taking notes. Oh my goodness. Carrie, your turn. What do you have?
oh my God. How do you, man, this is going to be a tough episode. Like, I was like, this is going to be so enjoyable and conversational, but how do you follow those? I mean, really? I mean, you have Gray, who pretty much puts, like, is what one thing I think is super needed, because for myself in my healing, my parts really needed to be able to see everything in black and white, all the evidence just laid out, undeniable, you know, to really get over the denial, even though we had so much validation already, you know. So, I mean, Gray, the way you put things together is undeniable, you know, the evidence essentially. And then Nathan, you know, is such an amazing, inspirational, you know, like, you know, gets really, you know, I mean, both of you get that fire going, you know, but it's like, you know, but Nathan, it's like, you seems like you've been fighting this battle in the open and trying to inspire people for a while, and it's, you know, and you do, you know, you do it justice. So what do I add? So essentially, like, I think that when I'm used to talking to people about this, because I've actually woken a lot of people up in my tattoo chair, you know, it's a captive audience, you know, and I cannot stand small talk. It makes me want to pull my hair out, you know. So you know, I'm like, tell me about your childhood, you know. And in that in that process, usually we talk, you know, we're going to end up in some subject matter that interests them, is going to end up, you know, circling back around to the grand, you know, everything that we deal with. And for me, that's dealing with psychopaths, basically. So I kind of, like Nathan, back it up with, you know, my own testimony. So I explain, you know, that I am a sex trafficking victim. I can openly say that, you know, nowadays. I have for years, to be honest, but now, like, it's the thing that, you know, people, oh, you know, like they have some understanding of that You know what I mean? Yeah, and are actually be interested to hear more rather than just glossing over. So I say, like I was, the daughter of a pedophile, it was like most of the time my dad abused me to snuff porn. And I was like, snuff porn, is essentially, come back to snuff porn is essentially, people being killed, in during sexual acts, or, maimed in horrible ways. And they tell me, oh, like actually kill? And I'm like not simulated. And I'm like, no, actually killed. So they say, snuff, that's a thing. Most people that I talk to don't realize that it's a real thing that happens, and they're like, but why? But why? So I say, well, I have to explain a psychopath to you, because to me, when everyone is like running around scratching their heads, looking at everything that's wrong in the world, they're pointing their hands at the police or this institution or that institution. And regardless, I'm like, you're talking about the same group of people. I'm not talking about a cult. I'm not talking about some crazy conspiracy. I'm talking about a psychopath. Everyone understands psychopaths exist. So how does a psychopath think? Well, a psychopath is essentially how I understand it and describe it is, they don't start off that way, in my opinion. Sociopath, psychopath, with immense words, like I hate all of that DSM-5 shit. But regardless, so you're going to have a baby that started off innocent. So how do you get a psychopath from a baby? Essentially, you put that baby through so many situations early on that they've realized that they cannot survive with empathy. They've had their own attachment, smashed so many times, essentially, and are in a very unpredictable situation. And that is also extends to witnessing abuse. When you're small, it's not always like them being abused themselves, but they can be in an abusive environment. But regardless, what ends up happening, I'm like, put yourself in the position of that baby. If you recognize that you cannot get love, and that your attachments are unpredictable, and that your environment is unpredictable, and all of that stuff, your obsession is going to be with survival. Your obsession is going to be with power. It's going to be essentially with being able to control your environment, being able to control the people around you, because they've been in a state so long of powerlessness that now that's what they need is power. And as they get older, I do believe it is like a certain level of consent, too, because the child, is conditioned to be that way by their family and maybe some genetics as well. But they're going to continue to choose to essentially violate people's empathy. They're essentially going to choose to continue to violate the will of those around them. And the main reason that they're going to do that is because, like I said, the baby has never been motivated by love. That thing has been fucking calloused. There's not a connection in their brain. So now you're going to have a human being that, like Nathan says, looks like a human being, but it's essentially a skin suit, because they're not connected with compassion. They're not connected with God. And their pure obsession is with power. And how do you prove that you have power most of the time is snuff porn, is child porn, is essentially taking something innocent or anything, and putting it in a position it really doesn't want to be in, a position it's begging to be out of, and it's all your it's essentially a demonstration of all your power, that you're not only destroying the innocence, but every premise of pain is essentially like an example of your power, your will to dominate over your surroundings, over that child, which is not a child to you any more than a chair or a desk is, essentially, and what ends up happening is you have to extrapolate that, if those people are willing to do that, to their own kids, they're willing to do it to other kids, and their pure hunger is for power. I'm like, then you just have to expand that, there's been generations of a small percentage of people that are psychopaths, but each generation you're going to have those psychopaths, and those psychopaths are way more motivated by power than any of us normal people that are motivated by love and family and connection. So what ends up happening is, as we've gotten to where we're at today, is the psychopaths continue to promote other psychopaths into these positions of power, to where we're at, where we're now, where you have essentially every single institution has, if it has some level of power, it's been infiltrated along the way by psychopaths. So everyone's running around scratching their heads, being like, how can child porn be such a huge industry? How can, food be so and like killing everyone? How can pharmaceuticals be so in killing one? How is it that, you know, that there's all these wars going on that no one is interested in ever? You know what I mean? Like over and over, like every sector of society, and everyone's running around, you know, like black pilled, like, oh my God, it means that the world is and everyone's evil. And it's like, no, it's like you haven't seen the hidden hand, you know, of homies, psychopaths that for generations have promoted each other, and ultimately they don't have trust, they don't have loyalty. So how is it that they work? You know, how do you choose to work with each other? They work with each other because mutually assured destruction. You know, they work with each other because they have blackmail on each other. That's the thing that makes them love each other and hang out with each other, because they can all be pedophiles together and enjoy it. But it's also why, you know, you end up with it's also why you end up with them, you know, using blackmail and this whole industry, you know, to essentially have a hold over each other. So my hope, you know, is that at some point, as people are understanding more about psychopathy, you know, it's going to simplify the problems of the world to a degree and kind of shine the light on those cockroaches, essentially, you know, and to where once people understand their antics and like what they've been up to for generations, it makes it a little bit simpler, like all the things that are going on in our world, I think.
Oh my goodness. I loved all those answers. That's something that I get comments a lot about on my YouTube channel is like, hey, I'm trying to wake people up, but every time I do, I say the word Illuminati and they turn away. Like, what can I do to make it easier on their ears, you know? And so I think these answers were all so diverse and so different, but they can hopefully, whoever's listening on the other side was taking notes and helping to create what that might look like for them. Did you guys have any feedback for each other on that?
Can I do a PS real quick?
Go ahead, girl.
Sorry.
No.
Sorry. The one thing I forgot that I usually go over with my helpless victims while I'm tattooing beautiful art on their bodies is the Satanism thing. So essentially once we've walked down the road essentially of them understanding psychopathy and everything, I usually just kind of follow that up with like, now look at SRA. That's the thing people have an issue with, is picturing pedophiles in robes for some reason. But I just tell them, I'm like, if everything in your soul makes you want to destroy innocent lives, like why the fuck are you going to believe in a God that's going to spank you once you're dead? You know what I mean? Like, obviously, if you're a psychopath that isn't an atheist, you're going to end up subscribing to some religion that's going to like satisfy your existential dread, you know, and essentially be worshiping, even if it doesn't exist, you know, you're still going to be worshiping some form of negative entity who essentially likes doing all the things and justifies doing all the things that you want to do anyway, and all your fucking ritual parties and shit like that. So that's how I also kind of add in, you know, people have a hard time believing SRA, and I just put it that way. I'm like, it's like anyone has religion, you know what I mean, and they do whatever they want behind closed doors. These people, that's their religion, you know, and you don't have to get all hung up on the fucking robes. Sorry, that was it though.
Thank you for that. Who else had feedback? Did you, Gray?
Do you have something, Nathan?
I want you to go. I yield.
Look at these.
Oh, that's the third time. That one's so. All right, exactly what she's talking about. How the psychopaths do what they do and take over industries. Of course, they take over business. Of course, they take over this and that because they are willing to do whatever it takes. Period. No reservations. It doesn't matter. So they're going to get it over the next person. Why wouldn't they? Now, furthermore, over time, this develops and really skews. It's one thing if, you know, all you and your friends, you know, or, you know, go on a race, but, you know, one guy, you know, is willing to Nancy Kerrigan someone's ankle, you know, I mean, whatever it is. Like, here's the thing is, unfortunately, you know, in this game of life, when there's no holds barred, the people that are willing to act the dirtiest often take the lead. And here's the thing, though, even though they do work together and promote each other and everything, and it gets skewed, here's a few things about it. One is that they work together, but as soon as these cockroaches see the light, they scatter. They're worried about themselves. They can't trust the next one, and they fight amongst themselves. They have no power and loyalty and unity. Loyalty is mutual blackmail. Loyalty is mutually assured destruction. That's it. That's it. There is no true loyalty. Other than that, here's the thing. The psychopaths are working against the universal principles. Now, they take universal principles and they will use them in a twisted, perverse, inverted manner, but that's going against the flow, and sooner or later that self-corrects. So no matter what, when you have these psychopaths working together, when as soon as there's a problem, they fight amongst themselves, scatter, do whatever, they don't really have that power. They're going against the flow and they're fighting amongst themselves. If people like us come together, we can have true unity, true loyalty, true trust, and now we come together in a manner. Because here's the thing, is the psychopaths, the only thing keeping them together is mutually assured destruction and a quicker path to the power. But the higher they climb, the steeper that pyramid gets, and the rest of them start falling off. And it will be that story until the end of time. If they go up, some are going to trickle down, some are going to trickle down. They can't stick together. We come together, which unfortunately has not happened as much. It's been people divided. That's why they keep the people divided. Now, specifically addressing the psychopaths that are taking over business, industry, agriculture, politics, military intelligence, industrial complex, so on and so forth. Here's what I really focus on personally is the child trafficking. Here's the issue. Child trafficking, snuff, all pedophilia, all that, it's horrible. People don't want to think about it. They don't want to deal with it. What they want is to know that someone is taking care of it and it not to be in their face. The only other people that are interested in it is someone who has had firsthand experience with it, either on the receiving or the perpetrating end. Unfortunately, sometimes both, right? But here's the thing is, a child trafficker, a child perpetrator, abuser, the thing they want first and foremost is a job in anti-trafficking. Why? A supply of victims. Already authority. It provides them from other people having that job and actually pursuing them. It allows them to steer the course. It gives them everything good. It's security, power, funneling. They can make money from it even easier. Like it's just ridiculous. So think about that. Who's trying to head off these anti-child trafficking organizations? Unfortunately, there's a skew towards perpetrators. And over time, that skew has unfortunately developed into a mess that it is now. And people might not think about it, but once they think about it, they say, oh yeah, that does make sense, because who's really trying to get knee deep in this? People don't want to be around that. It'll drive you crazy. It's the perpetrators, and that shows over time. And it's time to clean that up. Cockroaches.
Nathan, did you have something to add?
No, I don't want to say anything else. Y'all crushed it. Keep going. This is great.
That was really fun. Thank you guys for those great answers. Like I said, I know that's going to be helpful for people, just to understand that it's hard to simplify this, because you want to just divulge everything. So having some ways that you can make it, an under 15-minute conversation where you're getting a lot of info, that's not too much. Like, that's great that you guys are helping people navigate this. Okay, next question. What types of programming and training were you subjected to as a child, and what were the purposes or jobs you were being groomed for in the cult or family you grew up in? And we're going to go the order: Nathan, Carrie, and then Gray.
What types of training was I subjected to? What a word, subjected. Yeah, I don't think it's a volunteer-based program. Let's just get that right out of the way. Coercion is a very potent tool when it comes to this entire thing. If you can't understand the level of coercion that people are capable of inflicting on each other, your little child, you got to understand something. A little child is so easy to manipulate. And because you have people that have seared their consciences completely to where they're at such a level of depravity that there is no holds barred. And so when you get to a state like that, for myself, you said it very, very well, Carrie. You want power after you've lived a life of somebody else always being the one in control. And power to me was always demonstrated most effectively through the edged weapons, period. To me, there was no more effective tool than my teeth and somebody else's throat. And I just wanted the opportunity to rip out these people's throat. That was really the core tenet of desire that I had, was to be able to stop them. If they can't have their throats, they can't have their power at the end of the day. And I'd seen so much filth go into these people's mouths and into their throats that I wanted to stop it. And so the specific type of training that I got brought into was really based out of what the Jesuits put forth. And the Jesuits are very much the militant arm of the Holy Roman Empire, this great whore of Babylon. And they have been chief shepherds of a form of killing that is quiet and covert and absolutely undetectable, for lack of a better word. And so Salat was the format of martial arts that I was trained up in, and another style that was called gutter fighting, which was a guy named Fairbairn, who just was an outrageously effective assassin for many decades and generations. And this is based out of it's like an X-class projects that the United States military and then people that are part of a more religious order have been following for a long time, which involves the art of silent killing. The art of silent killing is premeditated upon needing to kill your target in under 2 seconds. And I'm not talking about like injure. I'm talking about 100% turn them off completely. And so the core focus of that is central nervous system and targeting those areas and separating spine, separating brainstem, and not necessarily the heart. The heart, somebody after they have their heart blown out can be alive and fighting for 30 seconds and far long enough. So areas of target become your kidneys. A knife plunged into a kidney or a needle stabbed into a kidney paralyzes the body, and then you're able to go ahead and bleed someone out or do whatever else you need to. But I learned martial arts from people that were small, predominantly women or predominantly harem bodyguards, people that guarded the whores of the king, and so they learn a way of fighting from a very concealed position, from a very imposter based position, so that your entire tactic and focus is ambush, is making yourself look like somebody you're not, is being a chameleon in every single environment, no matter where you go in. Perception manipulation is probably the core tenet that I don't necessarily talk about all the time, because I don't necessarily always want to teach people how to manipulate other people. But if you are on the side of information rich and other people are on the side of information poor, it puts you at an advantage to be able to set up a situation in your favor. And the way you do that is manipulating the perceptions of those around you. So if people perceive a child, they have been conditioned throughout their life to perceive a child as generally innocent, generally not dangerous, generally not participatory in crimes. And so because of that, you have a camouflage that is innately put on you as long as you're tiny, petite, and you know how to get along with people you're a conversationalist. And so if you know how to fit the role of what people want you to become, you become that. And it's literally, this is why split personalities and alter personalities and personas are so conducive towards assassin training, towards structured programming, is because you are able to put on another person. You're able to put them on not just a little bit, like you actually become something other. You can become anything other in order to get through the situation that you're in. And so this becomes a core tenet of it, is being able to pull the psychological levers of the targets that you're going after. And so a lot of that was predating upon their lust, predating upon their sexual proclivity, and knowing how to act the part of a sex cat, like acting the part of what they want, which is a little boy that's innocent and vulnerable and scared and timid or weak and sad and sorry and lonely. All those perceptions of self allow them to get disarmed. And this is what enables you to be able to get close, because ambush killing is always exclusively based on the need to get intimate, the need to be kissing close at any given time. And so being able to close the distance in incredibly small amounts of periods of times. Also, a major component of that was also the involved in poisons and the art of a form of chemistry that, morphine is a way to kill a lot of people. Alcohol is a way to kill a lot of people. Air injected into the veins. Purple monk's hood. You can start to go native and start to find your own plants. You can start to grow your own gardens of it. And this is what you find in a lot of these Jesuits' gardens in their backyards, is plants for poison. And so you learn how to paralyze people and you learn how to incapacitate them. And at the end of the day, it leaves you with a skill set that is shockingly undesirable to a lot of people out there. And it sucks. Unless you want to go ahead and participate in the kingdom of if you want to participate in the conspiracy of silence, that's always invitation open. But if you want to be abstinent from it, it surely puts you at a disadvantaged for what to do with those skill sets. So do you train up a whole other generation to go ahead and do what you did, or do you go ahead and try to just expose the brutes for what they are and let them learn, like you said, Gray, how to fear the night?
Carrie?
So, for myself, the training, I would say that would start initially, and this is true for a lot of people that have like Delta or assassin type, violence type training, is that you're usually going to have a shit ton of sexual abuse, that starts all that off, not just because you need a lot of anger, like Nathan said many times, to kind of like direct somewhere, essentially, like once it's time to start, indoctrinating you into and training you to kill, but it's also because it, usually our initial jobs, are as child prostitute, essentially, and, a sex worker, essentially. So most of my training would be what you can imagine an adult sex worker would go through, so a lot of it was, was about, sexually pleasuring, obviously adult men, because I was, I was a small child, most of that, training was started with like my dad, in infancy. And then anything that was more, I was going to say like early on, that was more like violence related, is kind of like the core memory I had mentioned before. So essentially just, you're going to be shown a lot of kids, being killed in really insanely horrible ways, and so to create your dissociative splits, that they can then condition to have the different jobs, but also, to really condition you to understand what the alternatives are if you don't go along with all the different training. So for me, the training continued really with just, progressing into like pornography, that involved bestiality or snuff, and essentially becoming a perpetrator as a child, with that, on other children and stuff, so typically, it's to picture a little 6-year-old that essentially connect like a dominatrix, but that's most of what my training went into. And then the Delta side of things was essentially being so, and then along with that, also being able to like to torture. The Delta side of things, was essentially being taught how to be modeled after a wolf, but most often I was used essentially as like a hunting dog for my handler, on like human hunt type events. And had to participate, typically in, the killing of, a lot of times there was like multiple people that were being like hunted, so usually there would be some way that I would be involved for that, or kind of like a hunting dog, like last steps of the way, it's like would be my job to like find and corner, the prey for them to like come grab, essentially. So I was going to say, and then that training also evolved into New World Order training, essentially. So that was a job that they had told me I would have later on down the road, of essentially hunting down and finding refugees of the New World Order once they took over. Like I said, could be complete. But this is, this is everything that I was trained for, was to be a lame duck and infiltrate refugee groups, and then to essentially dispatch of all the adults and bring all the kids and babies back to the home base, essentially. And lastly, with the Delta stuff, it was essentially the ritual use. So I had a lot of, like Ray had mentioned, like morgue training, essentially, where it was typically things that were like up close and personal, as far as dissection goes and stuff, to where I could be used later on in rituals where I could be essentially performing the act of serving a black mass or dismembering a sacrifice, for cannibalism, or draining blood, all those kinds of things, essentially. So I think that's pretty much the extent of like the roles and jobs. There were some other some other stuff. You usually find that, like, you know, the training goes hand in hand with like as many different uses I think that they can get out of us, essentially, you know. But along those lines, I do want to say, everyone asks about honeypots and how to stay away from being honeypotted. And I'd like to say that in my experience, you are not going to get honeypotted unless you're a pedophile. So, that's all that's all I would say. I think that's pretty much the extent, you know, of the training. You know, there was some, you know, ritual training as well as like a priestess, you know, type role, but it's like, you know, it all kind of goes hand in hand to me, where I constantly come back to that. Essentially, I still consider myself through all of these different events to just be, you know, showing up as essentially a sex worker, you know, or, you know, a date to my handler, unfortunately, for the event, you know, that he was attending. So, yeah, so it was a lot of stuff, you know, just like the other fellas here.
Thank you for sharing. Gray?
I'm you know, and I'm sure that everybody does to degrees, but you know, I still have a lot of guilt for what I've been trained to do and for what I partook in. And I started going against this in 2008 and was really going against it 2013, 2014. And so I've been against these people for a while, but I have a lot of guilt and I have issues with the way people see me, but I'm here to be honest, and I want nothing more than to take this evil down. So, you know, like a lot of people early on, child sex slave, right? Go through standard kill training, stuff like that. As you get older, depending what you go into, that can kind of be used more as a battery to motivate you, if you will, to partake in other things. I was a fortunate, I suppose, survivor of methods, experimental methods with an extremely high mortality rate. And due to me being a survivor from this project, I was put into I was brought under the wing of a programmer as this pet project. And most people, when they're young, will kind of have a plan. They'll already know kind of where they want you to go. And they know sometimes that doesn't work out, and they have a couple of different offshoots, just, you know, just the way things go. There's a natural flow of things. Hey, we want them to do this. If they're not going to do that because that's too, you know, up close and personal, then we'll send them into this, or we'll send, you know, obviously there's a main route, but you might have to take a detour, right? Or something like that. So, you know, early on, I was trained, you know, under some funeral home directors, morticians, in forensic cadaver analysis, obviously, kill training, learning about anatomy, ways for a quick kill, right? A way for a kill that's instant, and they're not flopping around, they're not yelling, they're not resisting, you know, the off switch, as Nathan said. I was also, you know, into seeing with the forensic cadaver analysis, obviously trying to make this covert. And, you know, just kind of apprenticing others people, you know, learning like what are the ways to make this look different, you know. And then later on, I didn't last long in the child sex slave thing. And then later on, they tried to put me in acting. That again didn't work out. I went into public relations and advertising and management. You know, again, like Nathan said, you know, the perceptive manipulation aspect, it's disgusting. I have to change the way I behave and talk and interact with people because I will accidentally do things that I feel guilty about because I feel they're manipulative. Now, it's just ordinary things often, but, you know, when you're talking to someone, what do they want? What do you think they want out of life? What some other things, you know, it's not that hard to control people. If you completely drop all ethics, morals, and emotion, and you play this like the math equation it is, it's incredibly easy to manipulate people. If you zoom out, we're ants, we're beasts, just like everybody else. Of course, we're more than that, but just for all intents and purposes, unfortunately so. As I got older, there was a couple of things that happened. I was specially selected for a certain job in the family due to astrogenetics, and went through some major stuff. Monroe Institute training. The morticians obviously did the necromancy, which is divination. I'm going to breeze through some of it, but they were doing such sick stuff like under Robert White, who was the person who did my brain surgery. They would have brains that were kept alive outside of the human body, and they were practicing connecting them through like an EEG to where, just like they had the God helmet, they would say stuff, or the Stanley Coren helmet that would, pattern messages. They were testing hooking up people to brains that were kept alive after the fact for post-mortem terrorist interrogations, in case if they couldn't take someone alive and they had to kill them, and they're trying to obviously interrogate them. That's how it got passed off for Congress. This was actually early on to do things for some of these billionaire psychopaths, to see if they could transfer their consciousness, see if they could transfer their brain, see if they could have an avatar of a young human boy, right? Anyways, other things happened through that. Long story short, due to some experimental methods and communication that I had with some people post-mortem, right? Because they have tons of brains saved. For example, if you look, they save lots of people's brains after they die just to look into them. What you don't know is that they're alive. And it's back then, they could easily keep them alive for 300 years, just in like a jar with some stuff. I mean, this is, and you can look into this. This isn't science fiction. This is, old stuff. Anyways, long story short, for the family, they wanted me to become an oracle. Right after the commencement, the coronation, I rebuked that and rebuked the whole family because of what I experienced in a near-death experience when that took place. It's very painful to go into. I completely rebuked the family. Then I was handed off to the network, and what the network focused on was me basically refining processes, making them more efficient, involving less personnel, getting the flow of information to be as efficient as possible, seeing where we can not only be more effective, but cut resources, cut the amount of heads that need to be in on a project. The more heads, the more you have to share. No one likes sharing when you're a psychopath. I'm going to be referring to psychopaths. That ended up leading to me overseeing some programs, and I was operations manager for some programs in a sector of the United States, and was overseer for the network, and basically was involved with refining a lot of projects to try to get them as efficient as possible. So later on, after I'd done the public relations and advertising, which is basically like artist management in the music industry and stuff like that, in which it goes hand in hand, I got led into then to the military intelligence to kind of use those same skills on personnel and working on design and, again, efficiency for the thing. So just really sex slave stuff, kill training stuff, right? And then a little bit of, human resources, as ridiculous as that sounds. And overall, one of the most important things I was trained to do was to operate from logic, to operate from logic, to operate from logic. Emotion is nothing but fuel. And that's what they want. And the logic, of course, is what's extra twisted. But even if you don't twist it, logic will tell you how strong these people's foothold, and more than people's foothold is. So also makes it kind of hard to resist. They don't like emotion, not only because it can be inefficient in the battlefield, but because that's what also makes us human, how we feel. And I also tie that in with gut, although, that's getting iffy because they want you to move on gut too. But that emotion is what makes you fight, even though it doesn't make sense, against impossible odds. And that faith And that hope is what will keep you fighting. Again, against what seems like impossible odds to most. The odds are so stacked against you, most people cannot even accept the reality that they're existing in. And I hate to use an overused term, but cognitive dissonance. So basically, I got trained to be in, and I rebuked that.
That was a high note to leave on. Do you guys have anything to say, any of you, about any of the answers?
Y'all are awesome.
That was really brave of you all. Thank you for sharing.
I mean, real quick, yeah, I would just like to say that, like, one thing that I think we're all going to constantly come back to on this panel, like Gray ended on and everything, and like Nathan said too, you know, about recognizing the parts of ourselves, you know, that were completely motivated by power because of the things that we had gone through and the things that we learned, you know, granted us, you know, or anyone in the world, you know, power essentially is that on a certain level, like, we were all trained to be assholes, you know, like that's, you know, we were all trained to be killers, you know, and along with that does tend to come, you know, personalities, like, you know, for myself, front personalities, you know, that was completely different from the sweet, compassionate, you know, cute, artistic little hippie, you know, that I was by day. You know, it's like by night, I was a raging bitch, you know, because I was, you know, I was conditioned, you know, to believe that, you know, that I had some sort of position, you know, some sort of royalty type position, you know, and if I embraced that, you know, that it essentially made all of the torture that I had seen, you know, go away, you know. So it's, and, you know, and this is like a 5-year-old that you're, you know, treating like a princess, you know, and then turning around, you know, and locking in a cage. Like, so that's the thing, is like, we all kind of have to cut ourselves a little bit of slack, you know, because like we're here because we can all acknowledge that we were violent, insane assholes, you know, and it's like we've said before, like the fact that we're here is, you know, that's how we save the victims, you know, that we couldn't, you know, and do something to kind of like repent all that crazy shit that they made us believe about ourselves and do to others, you know. So like, you know, just saying, you know, like, all around, we don't have to be uncomfortable about it. I would like, any of you guys, I'm sure, would like more assholes to come out and just be like, this is what I did. Like, please forgive me. Like, let's fucking figure it out to stop the cycle.
I totally agree. I totally agree. And I'm so glad you said that, because the truth is the other side, like, core tenet of this is split mind. One side of your physical brain. I'm not talking about some kind of ethereal thing called your soul. I'm talking about your physical brain. You got 2 spheres up in there, hemispheres, half a sphere, and they literally have a cable running between the two. And when you sever ties between the two, one can't communicate what the other one's thinking. And one can communicate through pathways that the other one doesn't have access to. So you got one side that can communicate with words, and then you have another side that can't. And this is the side of secrecy, and this is the side of darkness and pent up frustration, like it's a constipation, the worst thing you've ever had in your entire life. Like, somebody just let me freaking go take a dump on the world and move on with this whole entire crap show, because that's all it is at the end of the day. You realize that you're literally living in a gigantic heap of crap. Like, you want to talk about just a tiny iota of training that you go through? People are like, what was assassin training like? I'm like, you know what assassin training was like? They locked me inside of a public restroom in 123-degree heat. You know what that does to a person? You figure out, okay, well, there should be water in there, right? And they turn off the water, and you're like, now what? You know, you're going to heat stroke and die. Like Lake Havasu City is literally one of the hottest cities in the entire country. I'd get up to 129 degrees in there. Like, I've got a problem with heat. I get pissed. Like, I just get incrementally more angry. I can't even describe to you the level of anger that I feel when I'm hot. Like, hot-headed is just not even remotely descriptive enough to articulate what happens inside of a person when they snap. Like, I'm not talking like some kind of like, I got angry and yelled some nasty words at somebody. I'm talking about like, I killed 40 people, you know, like with my hands and my fingers and my teeth and with tiny little knives. Like, unrelenting anger because they locked me in there and they just left me. And so what do? Well, there's one way in and one way out of that place, and that's that door, or there's a super tiny window that's not big enough to fit through. And so you got to find a way to get out of it. Well, if you can't find a way to get out of it, you know what you crawl into to cool off in? The cistern toilet. And that's literally where you go. You climb into a cistern of waste, of crap and tampons and bloody, disgusting, horrible, wretched, putrefying garbage, like the waste excrement. And you literally save your life by climbing into there. And if you don't, you die. And like, you learn this because they literally drag dead children out of these things and dispose of them. And don't worry, they're not going to waste any of it because they've got all these cadaver people, these cleanup people who dismember them and take their bone material out of it and grind it up and feed it to people in these disgusting cannibalistic cults because they love to consume the life and the blood. And they literally bake bread out of it. They bake bread out of their bones, and they literally take their blood, and these people consume it. And, you know, I crawled into that, and I literally lived a crappy life inside that place. And you know what? I survived. At the end of the day, I freaking passed the test. What is your promotion? You know, a life of nightmares. That's what you get, because you know what? I wish I could have died in there, but there was always this insatiable need to survive. There was something in me that wanted to live more than I did. And I think that was on the other half of my brain, the nice side. You know, the nice guy side wanted to live all the time, and the bad, every other side of me just wanted to die. I just wanted to die. As soon as the sun set, I just wanted to die. You know, it was just this inescapable desire for death. You know, I wanted the sweet relief, that like surrendered sleep that I saw happen. I saw so many people's death masks. I've seen so many people's faces of death. So I've seen relief on a lot of them. I've seen a lot of relief, and I've seen a lot of anguish, and I've seen a lot of other stuff. But you know what? You see, there is a death mask that every person wears at the end of it. And you know what? I always coveted that. I coveted that. I wanted that so badly. I wanted it, but for some reason, I always lived, and it made me angry. Like, absolutely insatiably angry. And none of that came out until after I came out. You know what I mean? It was like I could have lived in happy bliss if I never touched it all. And that's kind of the promise of a mind-controlled slave. Like, you can get along okay with the system running the way that they kind of structured it. You're basically you're a slave, but you don't. And it's like willful ignorance is this sweet, sweet bliss. But then suddenly stuff starts cracking through the foil. And that's what happened for me. And I realized it was better to go ahead and just live pissed off all the time than to live in despair and a need for death, you know, because that does leave. There's a mixing that can happen that can be really beneficial when those sides of you start talking.
If I may, real quick about this, obviously going back to, we're trained to and all this, and him talking about the split brain. It's so important that people understand, you know, a lot of kids grow up believing in Santa Claus, and they believe Santa Claus is going to bring them presents and it's going to be nice. Okay. But then at night, they're getting harmed by their parents, the people that are supposed to be loving them and bringing them presents with Santa Claus during the day. And at night, they're getting harmed, and it's everything horrible and it's everything different. And then the next morning they say, hey, you know, what is it? They said, that's a dream. Oh, those marks, it's a dream. It's a dream. That didn't happen. And the more you try to say something about it, the worse it gets. And then you're not even talking about it anymore. The name of the game is covert. Subconscious, it's in the background. People wonder why they do all these things, and you just see them, and it was reinforcing it, and that nonverbal part of the brain working the left-hand path while the daytime was going along like normal started to learn, oh, this is how the universe works. We don't talk about this. The daytime, and I didn't believe in Santa, but for all intents and purposes of this analogy, this example, the daytime wanted Santa to bring his presents and his parents to love him. And the nighttime was taught that you have to be a monster. And that's the only way that you'll ever survive, that you'll ever be anything. I was buck broken from my parents being my parents. And you wonder why these psychopaths will do anything for themselves. Because when you're buck broken and it's you, and everybody's against you, including your parents, the only person you have is yourself. The only thing you have is yourself. Everybody else has forsaken you. And then you must become the monster, and you must become because no one else is worried about you but you. You didn't have someone looking out for you. You had to be that for yourself. And that shapes the way you are into adulthood. And fortunately, some of us are strong enough to come out of that. And if you need to really look inside and say, who am I as a person? Oh, I've done these horrible things, all this. How do you feel about it? And I know how everybody feels about it. That's why we're here speaking out about it. And our feeling about it shows our character and really shows what it is. So there are no monsters here. Unfortunately, we've been through some horrible things. We were coerced and forced to do some horrible things, and even may have been molded into having a set of circumstances that led us to choose to do some horrible things. But that didn't happen, you know, in a vacuum. So there are no monsters here, and there are no here.
Really good insights, you guys. Does anybody else have anything to say on that one?
Yeah, so I was just gonna follow on what Nathan had shared, because it's like I felt a little self-conscious on like how fast I rushed through, kind of glossing over shit. It's like, oh yeah, it's just like stealth and grappling and like, you know, learning to like kill people or whatever, you know. But regardless, it's like I did feel like it might be like, as long as people are willing to, you know, to share like an image basically. Because for me, this is like, you know, this is essentially like what the part of my brain went through. You know, it starts off as a memory where it is the part of you that's trained to be fucking royalty and everything like that. And then what essentially for me, a lot of times that I was witnessing, and then I would be essentially given drugs, you know, so hallucinogens or hypnotic suggestions to a lot of times like almost like associate what I was seeing as happening to myself. And they would also do a lot of things like as well. So for me, like essentially like the asshole part of me rarely was allowed to access any sort of like torture type stuff. But to like reinforce the whole like obey and, you know, never be useless essentially to the cult. And I was told that this girl who looked almost identical to me had refused to do her job and had become useless to the cult, you know, essentially is, let me see here, see if we can see here. So it was essentially being in like, I'm like sitting on like my main handler's lap when in a room that's like essentially like an interrogation room where they're essentially killing a little girl who looked identical to me. And I was around 6 at this time, like by essentially showering her with acid from hoses. It was two guys, and then this gentleman over here, you know, is essentially convincing me that it wasn't actually burning my arm like acid. So I'm not sure if it was just really hot water, you know, and the suggestion of it essentially. But you know, it was essentially witnessing essentially what's the most horrifying thing ever, you know, is watching someone, you know, disintegrated to death, basically, you know, like screaming and begging for their lives, and then, you know, turning, you know, into, you know, gurgling mush, essentially, you know what I mean? And it's essentially like we're being shown this as we're being usually, you know, tortured and sexually molested, you know, and drugged, essentially, you know. And this is like a little kid who's essentially being told, you know, it's like you can either accept being the jerk, being the pet on my arm, being, you know, the dog that jumps through all the hoops perfectly, or you can be that, you know. And that's for, you know, for people to understand that it's like on a certain level, you know, feeling like being the asshole ends up feeling like the lesser of two evils as far as our own child brain when it comes to survival, you know what I mean? That it's like, you know, we're not playing at playing at some stupid shit like where it was like, oh, like, you know, like Nathan had said, you know, it you know, this kind of stuff was not like some Manchurian Candidate, you know, like, you know, trauma programming crap you see that's glorified in like Stranger Things or something like that, you know, like there's no psychic powers after like a little bit of some scares and booze and stuff like that, you know. It's like, it's just like horrendous torture, you know, that we see getting thrown into this mill. And like that's is how much life we've seen, you know. And so helping people and we're talking about this panel, and I joke about us having personalities, but on a certain level, like, you have to understand the gravity, like we give in our testimonies of what we went through, that what you have to put a person through to get even one personality in them that's willing to do these things, so that's all I kind of wanted to add.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Carrie. That your art brings such a different perspective to the things that people say. And I can't imagine how hard that was for you to draw that and to talk about that instance. And I really appreciate you being vulnerable, because it helps people understand things that are completely not understandable to, most people. Does anybody else have anything to add before the
Sorry to bring the mood down.
No, not at all. Thank you for sharing. It's so helpful. We need to
That's
have
okay.
these conversations, whether or not we hear them, like, we have to have them, and you have the courage to have them, and you need to keep having them. Okay.
Right.
You're amazing. Keep showing your
Yeah.
art.
Oh yeah.
Powerful.
And you
The
brought
last thing I forgot to say is they tell you that at any point they can turn on acid. So it's like, for my whole life I had a phobia of shower heads, and I didn't know why.
yeah.
Oh my
There you
God.
go. That's one of those. You did a great job at communicating the reality of the dirty, disgusting version of it, instead of the glamorized garbage that most people have percepted and, infiltrated into their mind.
All right, you guys.
Thanks, Nathan.
I love all the support that you guys give each other too. The next question is, what were your experiences with gifted and talented programs growing up? And what would you like society to know about these programs and projects? And the order we're going to go is Carrie, Gray, and then Nathan.
Man, I wish I could share more on the subject. Other than having so for myself, I was essentially placed in gate kindergarten on. It's one of the things for me, and this was in Converse Elementary, so in like San Antonio, Texas area, essentially mostly military school. So, so a lot of people will experience like military crossover with like, infiltrated gate programs. And I'm pretty sure the teacher was in on it too, because it was like one of the consistent memories that I always had was that essentially I had always repeated the same thing, a lot of like cover memories with like, very limited memories of our childhood, and it's like always the same crap I like repeated. And that's one of them, is that my teacher essentially, I would always say I was her favorite, and that she had loved me so much that she followed me from kindergarten to first grade to second grade, basically. So possible first handler, I don't know, but essentially it was in her class that I had been, tested for gate, and then, was regularly taken out of the classroom for that. Unfortunately, most of those are still blanks and everything. But yeah, I don't know. I know that she was definitely still kind of like testing me in class, because one of the vivid memories I did always have was that, in like kindergarten or first grade, or I think it was first grade, we were doing spelling tests, and she would essentially let me choose the words that I found the most difficult, so I remember doing like mystery or something, or like mysterious in like first grade, and feeling super proud that like, that she essentially said I was like too advanced for normal spelling tests, and I could essentially choose which, whichever words I wanted, to just to essentially see, that was always my experience with the advanced placement type stuff, is it's always this, kind of like seeing how much potential someone has, essentially, or where their potentials lie. So gate for me continued essentially my whole life. I went to, there was a little lag in middle school, but after that I went to a high school that is weird. That's all I'll say. It was all college professors and stuff like that, and I have a feeling that a lot of the people there were all ex-gate, and pretty much all of them were all ex-gate, and had very interesting backgrounds, But it was my experience there too that I felt like I was getting like kind of like funneled into the academic system still and staying there. Like I was always straight A student, you know, all that kind of crap. And in college, I was burning out, to be honest, you know, and I wasn't that interested in academics anymore. I was kind of getting really depressed because of like all the abuse and everything like that. And I wasn't functioning the best. So I wasn't even really going to go to college, but that wasn't acceptable to my school, you know, or my parents. So I actually had a teacher or my guidance counselor fill out everything for me for a scholarship, and I magically got this like scholarship that basically paid me to go to college. So I stayed you know, in college. That was a lot of my experience, was, you know, that I was always expected to be very high achieving. It was part of the sex slave too, that like I was like, after 7, I was always more of like a high-end prostitute, and being like clever and witty and intelligent, all that, talented at art and craft, like that was all kind of like part of the allure, I guess, you know what I mean? So that was mainly just my experience with like GATE and post-GATE education. It's definitely something where they're like constantly keeping an eye on you and seeing essentially how you're, you know, how you're doing, you know, and seeing like where your strengths lie. Oh, and I would say another memory I always had, and it'd be interesting to know if any of you guys have the experience of doing like, you know, the GATE field trips, you know. So I do have a memory of being taken out of, you know, out of fucking, this is crazy to me, first graders essentially, and like we're taken away from our parents, you know, and it was from multiple different schools. I think it was 3 different schools. They're GATE kids that were all in like the probably like the kindergarten to like probably like 7 range there, you know, basically to, you know, 2nd grade, maybe 3rd grade. You know, a couple teachers for like each group of kids, you know, but it's like to know that many parents allowed kids that young, you know what I mean? Like just onto a bus with like with you know, a bunch of teachers, and we all went to an aquarium basically where that was the cover memory, you know, that we slept underneath the shark tank, and you know, there was all this cool activities, you know, that we had done, but most of it's always been a blank, you know, until I started retrieving a lot of like the Delta type memories and stuff, where essentially it was a really large scale like training and testing event basically for psychic type abilities, and you know, essentially, I don't know, just some training related stuff. Like it's too much to go into now, but like, you know, so I would say, you know, those are my GATE memories. And I was so excited when Gray did his episode, because for years I had been trying to find someone, you know, else who shared my experience, because it seems like the common one.
Gray, go ahead. Speaking of.
I'm not even sure how to approach this, so I guess maybe I'll just I'm going to try to stick to my experience, because unfortunately I know like a lot about the GATE programs and associated, so I'll stick to mine, which also goes into, I was around someone that would teach classes. I'll get to that in a second, but so I was automatically in the GATE type class. You know, obviously there's a bunch of names. What is this? It's, you know, some sort of gifted or challenged program. It goes both ways, you know. And then it's controlled, you know, sometimes it'll be a student teacher, be field trip, stuff like that. So in kindergarten, you know, by then I'd already been in a pre-kindergarten thing based through the church, to where, you know, a lot of color programming, classifying colors, doing specific type of work with the color to identify math to this color, art to this color, so on and so forth, you know, just kind of reinforcing compartments and so on and so forth. Getting into first, we're doing a lot of testing, a lot of the psychic testing. We are putting all our hopes and dreams, our wants and desires, our family history, absolutely everything we are putting down on paper, and they are getting such a full docket of everything that makes you you and family history, that they use later in life, then you don't even remember listing this stuff, right? You know, games of telephone, stuff like this. In grade 1, it really started the game-based learning. Okay. They say, okay, so what you're going to do is you are going to communicate through a song. You are going to practice, ciphers, all this. It got engaged in a lot of espionage methods and covert communication and nonchalant things by learning them and engaging them as a game. That way, later on, it's going to be a lot better to use operationally. You can't learn that when you're an adult. If you actually like it and it's like just built into who you are, it's a fun game, just like a kid on his Xbox or Xbox. So I'm aging now, I'm old talking about Xbox. But anyways, so that was first grade. We're going into that. Into second grade, it's really getting heavy into the psychic testing and things like that. Where I was, which was New York, but I was in a very small town, and actually my uncle was the school maintenance man, and then my aunt was one of the bus drivers who would bus the field trips, right? So it was very controlled. And, we would obviously be taken to some military facilities and doing a lot of testing the room, test for the envelope to see if what you're in the envelope, just basic stuff. And then right after second grade or towards the end of second grade, usually someone ages in, right around 7, 8, you go into the next brain phase, and then it starts the split eye processing program. And it's really getting into stuff to where you're going in and they're kidding you with a machine that just really, overrides your brain and programs you. I remember it very clearly, and this was a machine made by DARPA, and then also started a lot of cubic training, which is game-based learning, linguistics. We did advanced learning solutions with cubic, and got into linguistics and stuff, but Rosetta Stone, a bunch of languages with Rosetta Stone, and we're in second grade. We did the linguistics, we did the game-based training. Yeah. And then I'm definitely missing something in there. But then going forward from there, by then I was in Nashville. Again, the name changed, same deal. We were very poor, and basically was like, everything that I naturally wouldn't want to do would get presented to my guardians as an excellent opportunity. And usually it cost so much money, they don't have it, but hey, he got a scholarship, he got this. Oh, hey, the teacher came out of pocket herself. A lot of this is done, again, with student teachers, with things like this, temporary teachers, sometimes the main teachers involved. But, then we went to Redstone Army Arsenal and NASA Space Camp, which is there in Huntsville, Alabama. Had some advanced programming with that. Had some, that thing and the brainy chair, and then the thing that twists you all around, spinning stuff. A lot of that was reinforced. Then going through that, I was out of school a lot. In fifth grade, here's what they started doing then was they started testing me with all sorts of stuff. And it got to the point where all of a sudden I said, oh my God, I was always the smartest. Everything was always easy, everything. Then all of a sudden I didn't know any of this stuff. And I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be exposed as the fraud I am, because all then I had always just never had to study, never had to do anything. I just knew it, right? It was all easy up to that point. Then in fifth grade, all of a sudden, whoa, they're hitting me with calculus, stuff like this. I was like, it was trigonometry. I remember specifically it was trigonometry. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, I'm just going to guess. I don't know anything. But what they started telling me was really coaching me to hey, just use your intuition. You tested good on this, just trust yourself, do all this, right? So then I win some contest from 5th to 9th grade in some gate program, and I didn't even remember taking it. Weird stuff started happening, but they're basically, by then it was a little bit more operational, and they were getting me to trust what was inside to just do. I would say it, even if I didn't know the math problem and they were doing crazy stuff, I would say it and I would get it right. I was just kind of trusting my instinct, trusting my brain to do the calculations for me, which now I know obviously was the altar in the background that was trained very adamantly to do that. So that started going operational by then. Then I'm away, and then now high school hits. I go to 9th grade. I'm in high school, but I was in an umbrella program before then. So then where I go is to something called middle college, which I was in high school, but it was at the college campus. And, I'm in a lot of college classes, and that's basically what it is. It's at the college campus. It's called middle college, but I was in 9th grade. I do that. Fun fact, where I went to middle college in that kind of gifted, scholarship pre-college entry program is also where the 325th PSYOPs Division is based from the Army. So that's funny looking back at that. But anyways, that was ninth grade. In ninth grade, 9/11 happened. Immediately after 9/11 happened, I absolutely flipped and lost my stuff and never went to school again. So that was the end of my gate career.
Thank you for sharing. Nathan?
You know, the path that I got put on was anonymity and never being allowed excellence. And so every time in school, it's really interesting. You all are hitting on that first grade time frame. So I like started out with like this pre-kindergarten class and schooling that was very like very structured and for the poor, but then there was these really brilliant other children in there like savants. And it was like definitely that was one of the first experiences I had with like individualized like child treatment plans and getting to see other children get extra privileges that showed brilliance, that showed excellence, and they got all kinds of extra stuff. So I got to see this kind of all throughout my life, but I was never allowed into that. I was never allowed to be a part of that. I was always set up to be stupid in some kind of fashion, to be like stumbling and tripping physically like a goof, like dumb, you know, in school physically. Grades wise though, grades were like absolutely easy. School was super easy. Nothing was really challenging, except at times I would come out of these other events totally a train wreck, unable to do basic computations of any kind, couldn't communicate, couldn't articulate what was going on. And so when any of those like I don't know, triggers got bad enough at school, I would change. My parents would pull me from that school and put me in a different one. And so I got bounced around a lot. Like I went to this place called Sunrise Christian School when I was younger, after that pre-kindergarten time, and I went there until second grade because my second grade teacher brought my parents in and was like, listen, we want him to skip up to fourth grade. You know, he is like there's no reason for him to be in our classroom anymore. And then after that, my parents pulled me halfway through that semester and homeschooled me. And then put me in a different school. The next semester, my mom was like, I can't even have him in the house. He's out of control for me. And so she put me in a public school up the road. And then as soon as I started showing aptitudes, specifically with like a language development course that they were doing for like Spanish speaking, I had a natural proclivity towards like absorbing languages really quickly when I was saturated in them. Like it doesn't take me out at any time at all to like pick up a language once I'm around it. But that started piquing interest of people that wanted to put me in these other programs. And as soon as that would happen, I was out of that school. And so like we moved to the White Mountains in Show Low, Pine Top, Lakeside, Arizona, and a huge school. It's called Blue Ridge School, and it's gigantic. It's a super tiny town of like 1,200 people. And but their football team has the highest number of wins of any team in the United States. And so they breed, and it's like a literal school of cowboys, Indians, and Mormons. Like they bust in people from the White Mountain Apache Reservation, they bust in Navajos, they bust in LDS people. Like it's a freak show conglomerate of a bunch of cults. And it's like it's the known way of the town. And so that was my first time ever being exposed to a citywide inversion of a justice system and a normalcy. Lake Havasu had a different style to that. But the White Mountains was all about breeding fighters and screwers, you know, like buddy screwers, you know, and those were like their two main products that they had out there. And so in that school, they had a GATE program. That was my first time ever even seeing a GATE program and getting to be around students that were a part of that. But it was always like I was friends with those guys, but I was never allowed in that program. I was never allowed to touch it. I was never allowed to be a part of it. Every time I went to take tests, I had this like innate requirement internally to go as fast as I possibly could and just do whatever came like first instinct, like instinct based only responses to tests. And so I could score okay, but I never scored in the super high category unless I like slowed down and started applying myself a little more diligently. And so that like carried on all the way into like middle school and high school. And so my family moved me around to back to another private Christian school up in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And when we went up there, the programming got really put into the military side of this. Up until then, it was very cult based. It was very much like the Brotherhood of the Snake and all these people. It was really driven in that direction. But I wanted the military path. And so they brought us out to the United States Air Force Academy, and they have a really advanced neurolinguistic programming center that's there at the USAF. And that is where I got brought in to. That was my first like entry into like the deep underground military bases that are on the backside going up towards Rampart Range Road. And my dad pulled me out of school for my sophomore year in high school as a prerequisite. If I wanted to go to a public high school, he said I had to be homeschooled with him for a year. He wanted like a full year. And that was my first time, like full sit down, rebuild and entirely like integrate a core component of my system towards being a military spy. That was it. Like my family believed that they could program me and train me enough to infiltrate the United States military and to be able to rise up in the ranks of it with assets that they had, like in my advanced training, like my drill sergeant, my personal assigned drill sergeant who was training me and grooming me for the Soldier of the Month competition. Like he was Staff Sergeant Reynolds, like a black guy who was like upper connected Reynolds family guy. And so like they had people structured for me to go into the military to try to be able to go in and be a backdoor reporter to them. Ultimately, that was like what I got really groomed to. So the programming that I got shifted into was really based out of the Air Force Academy. And like I was supposed to go into the United States Air Force Academy, which brings in like congressional recommendations and all this other stuff. But that was where going into the first dumb is when they would do these, but they did the thing that would like kill me out of these like talented programs of any kind, of any accolades, is I hated having to compete. I'm not competitive in the same way that most people are in that world. And so like when I had to fight another person, there was still a bleed over of empathy, of seeing them as me in like a reflective manner. And it would trigger me. Like it would trigger me in these fights. Like they'd like to do these weapons tests. And what that means is like you have your pet project that they're working a given programmer, like this guy Richard, my programmer, he had a version of military programming that they were trying to patent, like the same way we would patent a drug or a product. These people patent products of mind control, and that's like I was a version of that. And so they would pit me against another fighter, and sometimes they were children, but as I got into the military, they were generally soldiers, fighting age men, 17 to 25-year-olds. And so like one of those was a literal like arena, like a indoor soccer arena where they set up little fights like this. And I had a demonstration, a proof of concept, and went in and had to fight somebody in there. And that was my first exposure to like the military side of their, their high talented programs. And so that jacked me up really badly. And I got out of that and went to public high school, but for all intents and purposes, school was easy. Anytime I had a major standardized public test of any kind, I was like, it was hardwired in me to get like in the 80th percentile, never higher. Like when I took the ACT, I went as fast as I possibly could and got a super low score. I tried to like bomb that test, but still somehow somebody pulled some levers and got me into the University of Colorado at Boulder with like a fifth of what the required GPA was. Like it was so impossible. And I literally just wanted to be in the military. I didn't want anything to do with schooling of any kind. I hated schooling. And so I wasn't as fit for any of these kinds of programs. In that, the only time I started being able to express that was really in the military.
Any feedback, anybody?
I'm just going to say it's super interesting to hear. Sorry.
No, go.
Okay, I was just going to say that it's just super interesting to hear how common it is for us to have essentially front personalities that are like trained to be so opposite. Like not have skills, like that are, that our back ones, do essentially and it keeps us in the state of helplessness and powerlessness to a degree if we never are able to access, like Nathan, your full academic potential, or myself, it was typically seeing myself as, like lacking in a lot of confidence. So it was the complete opposite of the back personality, it's like, but it's interesting to see how that's also a motivating factor to them to keep the loyalty. Because if we are allowed to excel, but only in one place with them, it's like, it's a pretty heavy tie.
Yeah. They don't want anyone to stand out to where they could be used by others. And they definitely don't want us to use our own talents. And it's funny, yeah. Nathan, you're talking about the Air Force, which is, known for having the highest education already. So, they're obviously already set up for that. But one thing I just wanted to mention real quick that I did forget was I was briefly between 5th grade and 9th grade. I was in 7th grade for a while. And when I was in 7th grade, someone close to me was actually a substitute teacher. And she would go around to all these different schools. And I don't exactly know the mechanism that I was brought into it, but somehow I was basically brought in as a student teacher, if you all have heard from that. So I was a student teacher, but it wasn't gifted programs. It was the challenged programs. And it would have a bunch of people with Down syndrome and so on and so forth. And they had me teaching them to use these computer programs and stuff like that, which some of these people would excel at wildly. And just basically making friends with those. And she would go around to different places and go through intensives with these kids when she was doing a substitute. I assume that also part of that was her not being really into the system where they can track back who that teacher was and so on and so forth, and was another way to get in there, at least with the methods, because, you know, once you get to that sweet spot when it's at a certain age, they can really introduce that split eye, split brain programming with some of the technology, and that can at least do something, you know, even if someone's not fully programmed and all that, it can at least really get them to where they can access them, you know, and it really creates a network of people that can have their strings pulled. But I just wanted to mention that I have extensively seen and then also been privy to that the same things are going on in these challenge programs as well. It's just all about a controlled thing that has special requirements outside of the general curriculum, and then they take it from there however they see fit.
Thank you for that. It is interesting hearing all of your different stories, and just how diverse it is. You know, that's something that I get asked a lot about too, ever since Gray's episode about the gifted and talented. People are like, wait a minute, I was in that. You know, a lot of people are in those programs. So it is a neat thing to realize that, you know, people who went through that and had those really traumatizing experiences, that you're not alone, that this is common to have associations with it to some capacity, even if you don't get in it fully, you know, fully diverged in it, I guess, like how some people do throughout their whole lives, to just come in contact with it and to have that testing, to be one of those people who was taken out of school all the time for testing, or who went on these weird field trips. You know, I think it connects a lot of dots for people who went through that. So I really appreciate you guys sharing. Do you guys have anything else on that topic?
No, just that, I mean, in my experience, not all gate people were involved, you know, like
Right.
it was, for me, it was about like half. So like it was like half the kids for me would go to like upstairs to the second floor where it was like a more normal gate essentially. And then it's like, but then a lot of times like another half of us would essentially all get put on a white van, you know, and taken off campus, you know, to like, you know, a hospital, a bunker, you know, something along those lines, you know, for some sort of like training type event, you know. So it's hard when you're dealing with like memories, you know, and having blanks and stuff, and be like, oh, like I was in gate, and, you know, it means for sure there's something there. Like, but if you've been feeling it, like that's how I was before Gray's episode, is like I was like looking, I was like, someone else has to have weird experiences like I did with this shit. If you've been feeling like that's the case, like hopefully this is validating.
Yeah, it's definitely not everybody, of course. Just like, let me equate it to Freemasons. A lot of the lower level guys who don't know, they're the guys that are going to go after, say, oh, we don't do this, I'm just a normal guy, you know, but they're creating the atmosphere of, you know, illusion. Okay, this is what it is. And then other people get busted away. But if you have been in a program since birth, you can bet that somewhere along the way in your education was something. I mean, obviously they're going to try to get to you, whether it's homeschool, whether it's a program at a school, something like, I can't really think of anybody that I know that has been in this since birth that did not have some sort of programming, you know, at school, homeschool, whatever it be, you know, in their curriculum. So, I mean, that's just a component of this. And they might be able to pull people out, put people in, do whatever, but obviously there's a few boxes to tick, and they're going to get them ticked somewhere. Otherwise, you know.
Absolutely. That's really good feedback, you guys. Okay, let me find next question. All right. Knowing that your alters were created by programmers and abusers, how did you grow and build trust, love, and acceptance with them? And we're going to start with Gray.
So build trust, love, and acceptance with my alters. Okay. So, I mean, I'm going to answer this as it's asked, but my experience is by far not the experience I hear other people having. And everybody's individual, but I think a lot of people, go through different stuff like, oh, they might get in therapy, then find out stuff, this and that. That was not my experience. My experience was, unfortunately, I was deep into organized crime and vigilante activity, because even though I was in organized crime, I judged everybody and didn't like what they were doing. And I had come from a rough place where I saw people in my family and I was trafficked. So obviously I didn't like this. I had people, family members that were addicted to crack and so on and so forth. So I had ethics and morals, right? So then that led to me getting into the military intelligence and all that, and these, programs off the books. And then what happened was, all of a sudden I found myself so deep that I started talking to myself. One of my, it wasn't like, oh, I found out, oh, I think this happened. I'm talking about boom, part of me spoke to me, was like, hey, we got a problem, and from there, part of myself kind of saved myself, kind of made it worse. It's hard to act, but so really just through having a mutual enemy and fighting them with everything in us and being in extreme situations, and me slowly being desensitized to extreme situations in my daytime personality, that I could already kind of handle it. So then when it came to and hit, I could feel it. It's part of me. So just innately, I said, oh, yeah, this is this. I didn't even know what it was before I started making peace with myself and love myself and all that. It doesn't matter. I don't personally look at it like that. I don't care who made us. God made us. I went through some stuff. Whatever these people wanted to do, whatever these people wanted to program, all that, it's irrelevant. I know how I feel. This is me. And, I can look myself in the mirror, and I can look myself in the mirror. I can accept the worst that I've done, just like I can accept the best that I've done. And I personally don't have the problem of making peace with myself, because I understand what I went through. And when I healed through aspects of it and relived it, I remembered the change in my mind while I was in an impossible situation. And just having to adapt and having to change, and just knowing this is what I have to do to survive. This is what it is. And then slowly moving to desensitized and just becoming that. And when I went through it and flashbacked and relived it, I was instantly healed from a large part of the malice. Okay. I've got problems just like everybody else. But once I really confronted what I had been through and who I was fighting and seeing what they did, because I already had some good bones in my body. I was already trying to, fight the bad guys, even when I was a bad guy. I just was a little bit twisted of who the bad guys were exactly in the big picture. But so I didn't have a problem accepting, trusting, loving parts of myself, because my daytime personality was already pretty messed up. And we came together and found each other in the worst of places, and then created a bond to fight against the common enemy. And the rest is history. Happily ever after.
Nathan.
Oh man. An absolute need to survive. That's it. At the end of the day, the handwriting early on was always the biggest clue to the duplicity and the multiplicity side of it. There was this gigantic hanging question mark to who's the guy who writes in cursive, asked by the same guy who's always asking who writes in blocky chicken scratch capital letters. Like, what the heck is going on between these papers? Like, I kept a journal, dadgum, these stinking journals that haunted my dreams. I would open my journal and be like, what the heck? Like, it's not that I didn't remember writing it. It's that I didn't remember writing like that. And it was always so confusing. It was always confusing. And that was like, I had a lot of these little like nuggets along the way that just didn't make sense. And this insatiable curiosity that just kept me wondering why. And every answer I ever found along the way was insufficient, was not sufficient to help me understand what was going on with there. And so when I started seeing people in public accept us and say our names and acknowledge our existence and not be afraid. When I saw that, like, I had to physically see it with my eyes. I had to go physically in the room and watch Russ Dizdar. I had to physically see him and evaluate him and scrutinize him and observe him to see what was in a man that made him not fear people like me. That he's not like, y'all, like, you want to talk about his first encounter with the chosen one? That's, by the way, what this like idea of it. I'm not just talking about some kind of like traumatized victim stuff here. I'm talking about like the living embodiment of like the soldiers of the Black Sun. I'm talking about chosen ones that were programmed to slaughter cities, to burn them to the ground, to like dismantle empires. That's all that's the side of me I had to find. Could anybody love that? Can somebody love the killer? Was easy. Can somebody love the killer of killers and the destroyer of worlds? Was a different thing entirely. And I didn't know if my wife would at all. And so I wanted to just first see, is there anybody in mankind that could? Is there anybody that can actually be authentic about this thing they talk about, you know, purpose and all the rest of that. And like this is his book, by the way, Black Awakening. This one caused me more internal fighting and tremors and terror and dread and sadness and sorrow. This was like the hardest thing I've ever tried to read in my life. It took me months and months and months because I would sit down and I would try to read this book that on my front should have been no big deal, just another book I've read. But on my backside, I would fall on my face asleep every time I tried to read this thing. Like, just boom, just like overwhelming exhaustion, like instantly, like shut down. Like, what the heck? I would go to this stinking cafe called Alfalfa's in Boulder, and I would sit down and I would take a quadruple shot espresso, wham, and then I'll take another one, wham, and I would be like, game on, son, and I'll be all like sweaty and shaky, and I'll be like, I'm gonna find out who I am. What is this thing? And I'll be like, yes, and then I'll be like, I don't remember anything I just read. I'll be like, what the heck? And I would sit there with a highlighter and I would scroll. And what I would do is I had these multicolored click pen, Bic pens. And I'll be like, okay, each personality is getting a color and you can highlight what's important to you. And we're going to figure out what the heck's going on later. And then I would like, it would just be like blank page. I'm like, what? Anyways, that was frustrating, disgusting, difficult. But I can't find the page because I'm pissed. Anyways, this Victims of Mind Control, it's chapter 19. Oh, Rogue Chosen Ones. This is freaking beautiful. Let me just explain to you what this guy went through. This guy went through freaking hell. Like, could you imagine a whole crew of us just showing up on some of these counselors' doors? These poor counselors, y'all. I just got to say, you know why? These people they genuinely love people. Like, they actually have this like heart of actual real love. Something I'm woefully disconnected from in actuality. Like, I have a version of love and understanding that's so disgustingly twisted and corrupted that it makes me incapable of truly comprehending like unconditional love and this like a reality of love and stuff, like that feeling like somebody has when they're like, I want to go to my mom. Like my son Abraham, he's 6 months old and he likes to crawl to me. That's totally different. I'm used to daughters that all want to crawl to mommy, you know, and like he wants to crawl and find me and I'm like, oh, you love me, this is so cute, you know. But I'm so woefully disconnected from that. So the idea of like having love with another person or like this person inside of me was so disconnected. I always have to try to observe people behavior and try to imitate it so I can like think I'm understanding it, because I bonded to dogs and wolves before I bonded to people. So it's very, very perverse, my understanding of like what's affection and what's comfort and what's safety. And so like trying to have compassion is always something that I have to like think about intentionally, like deliberately understand. And like he literally, these people were showing up in churches. Like a lot of people like show up in churches trying to get help because they're like, their life's falling apart. They don't know what's going on with them. And if they're like an asset out of containment, if they're like a program person who's off track, they will go into places to try to get help. And these people were showing up. And this is back in like, gosh, y'all, this is like the early 90s, late 80s, mid time frames. And his wife, one of the survivors here, listen to this. This is on page 343. He says, I got a call and was told that this chosen one was dead. Someone else brought me to the obituary and a notice of burial. This was like a guy who is like your dad, basically, Carrie. psychopath. Anyways, one victim went to the showing to see if he was dead for sure or if it was a cover-up. In the weeks that followed, all the victims told me that he is dead for sure, and they have had no more contact by him. I asked a couple who lived in his area and had been victims of his to share. They told me how he died and when. His death was 10 days after we prayed that God would stop him no matter what it would take. I believe with all my heart that God did step in and spared the victims any more of his horrific abuse. A few months went by, and a friend who is very experienced in helping victims brought me a distant family member of this man who is now dead. The boy and many others were now on their list of young people who were ritually abused by this man. I asked the counselor how many victims of this one man is out there. I've never forgotten this. She said that they had found 200. This rogue chosen one was a danger to everyone he met. He had a military training and was very versed in psi power and deep ritual powers. He also had old Nazis who helped raise him, or at least part of the coven. This chosen one was an extension of the old dream of a master race. If this master race, then no one is safe. The other man who was brought to our church by members were doing outreach. They were counseling him and taking him through some deliverance prayers. I told them to look at his eyes because he had the eyes of a multiple. I told them to keep a discerning eye on him and that I would also. It's this man who became missing for a few days. His wife got threatening calls and the police were called in. The caller sounded German and declared that the missing man had sinned against the master Satan and had to be punished. I was called in by the police because the German-speaking caller asked for me. While at the house, another call came in and it was the German. We argued and he finally hung up. The police had tapped the phone line and recorded it all. Finally, to everyone's surprise, the missing man came home within about 45 minutes of the phone call. This is the one who attacked me and ended up in leg chains and handcuffed on the ground. It was this man who rose up, and the sub-personality with the demon screamed and German accent barreled, "We are the legions who will rule the earth." He too had military background. He too seemed innocent on the outside, but it was the stuff within that would abduct and slaughter 2 teenage girls in satanic rituals. One was 14 and out of state, and she was used and abused and ritually murdered on the date of demon revels. The other was 17 and murdered in the same horrific way. Her death was on satanic revels. The Nazi sub-personality ritually murdered these 2 girls as a purification and re-demonization process. The police had taken this man. This is why, by the way, that we are not really excited about dealing with police and law enforcement in a lot of ways, because this is what happens when you go to the cops. Ready? The police had taken this man to the hospital for a psych eval, which, by the way, accomplished nothing, so they let him go. While I was at the hospital waiting, another chosen one, a police officer I was working with, showed up in full uniform. This officer was from the same area that this man and the other I just wrote about was from. When the officer saw this man, she literally ran out of the hospital. The officer came back a few minutes later, and a sub-personality handed me a note. On it was where this man lived, the name of an old Nazi Satanist who raised him, and gave me details about his programming. The sub-personalities in this officer then took me to the site where the girls were left naked, cut up, abused, and dead. A personality very versed in coven rituals told me why the girls were murdered. A few days later, the man who had killed these girls started calling me and asking out to find out if the police were saying anything. He then told me what instrument he used in the ritual. The girls were stabbed slowly over and over again with a tool only a law enforcement knows about. This case is not over, so I will wait to tell the rest. Why? Because this man is still out there. I know what the sub-personality has done. We have looked each other eyeball to eyeball, and in his eyes was pure, demonically energized evil. Both of these men were split, programmed, and trained in this kind of satanic slaughter. One has been stopped, the other has not. He will do this again. It is in him. Unless someone will pursue this and pray that it will not go unsolved. I know of a few folks who know all about this, and they are praying for God to stop it, whatever it takes. Who created these men and the officer? Whoever they are, they have the same agenda, methodology, and dream. They and those before them want a master race of super soldiers, and if you back this up far enough, you will land in Hell's Kitchen. This guy was weighing into the fray. This guy was trying to fight it out. And you know what? There's some people that he took on their cases and there's others he didn't. But this guy was at least enough of a physical living witness for me to see somebody say, these sub-personalities, these program parts will be looking like this. They will act like this. They will do this. And he started listing off character attributes about myself that I had never let out publicly, that I had never allowed to see the light of day. Like, I wear a neck knife on the outside of my shirt now, but for a very long time, I wore them strapped to my body and very concealed and constrained in very particular places, very concealed. I never let that out. And so for this guy to sit there, start calling out like where you hide your razor blades, where you keep your needles, like he knew way more than anybody else I'd seen publicly talk about. He actually knew. He wasn't just some charlatan, for lack of a better word. That was probably another handler that was probably going to scoop me back up, probably reprogram me and all the rest of it. He was an outsider and yet somebody that was willing to be in it. And you know what? He gave me this like inspiration to know that, you know what? Somebody out there can love us enough to know us, to identify us, and to not destroy us verbally when they've got all the ammunition to be like, you're the monster, you're the bad guy, you're the freak, like to still have a willingness to try to fight. And so how I found love, you know what? I found a war zone that was big enough for both of us to be on at the same time, because I got two really big fired up people inside me at any given time, and they collectively want to wage very different styles of warfare. One wants to wage a war with this beautiful, soft, technological tools in our hands, and the other wants to use very visceral and physical tools on an ongoing, perpetual, continual basis. And that's really a dichotomy of difficulties to raise yourself in. And so I learned, you know what? Integration was like an idol that was talked about in this like counseling circles. Like, you all just got to fit together. You all got to like work together. I'm like, you know what? Some of us, we really need to work alongside each other, because we're a lot better when we have some space and some distance, and we can respect each other and love each other from a distance, because sometimes we're not cohesive, at least not yet, at least not until we've seen enough play out, because you can't always get everyone together and everyone get along. It's not always like a good family reunion in there, you know? So how do you love each other? Like a normal family, messy, awkward, difficult.
Great answer. And thank you for sharing that passage too. Carrie?
Yeah, that's pretty perfect, you know. Yeah, I mean, being multiple, I mean, I'm pretty much on the same page as Nathan and Gray, you know, that, I mean, for me, I've talked about it before, that the metaphor has always been like viewing myself as a symphony, you know, as opposed to like a cacophony. So just basically that, you know, each part has had a very specific role in our survival up until this point, you know, if you're multiple. So coming to communication and meeting them with like a place of like kind of like gratitude for the role they played, even if it was like super, you know, on a certain level, like the communication needs to go both ways, and the communication doesn't happen if there isn't any sort of like trust or understanding. So just like, you know, just like Nathan said, it's like, it's almost like you're dealing, you know, you are dealing with different people, different personalities and stuff. So you have to kind of approach it the same way and trying to meet in the middle. You know, you're trying to bring them into the present, you know, and into the reality of the world, as opposed to the, you know, up inverted cult reality of the world, you know. So the psychopathic version, you know, pure logic version of the world that they've like trained you to be so good at operating in, you know. Those parts, you know, it's, you know, they felt good at their jobs, you know what I mean? Like, and on a certain level that we, you know, as front people, like need to essentially have some like gratitude, like I said, for them, and understanding, and essentially like they can then in turn, you know, bring some of those skills and everything towards, you know, like Ray said, the common enemy, which is, you know, most of, if you're dealing with like perpetrator aligned parts, it's because they don't have connection with understanding how bad it can be. You know, they don't have a lot of times like the association with their handler as a torturer as much as they do as like loyal, but then it's kind of put in the back of their mind, you know, the parts that have like undergone like the really horrible stuff, you know. So it makes it a little bit easier to ally yourselves with them. So kind of understanding that those parts were protecting you by doing like up stuff or thinking up things, you know, or believing that they're like something completely different, you know, than the front personality. that's what's going to facilitate, you know, the communication. And in my experience, like I go back to that metaphor, you know, it is about recognizing that like you don't get a symphony unless you have a bunch of different kinds of instruments, you know, like, and that's what I think the goal is for me as, you know, a multiple, and always has been, is that, you know, not every instrument playing whenever they want, you know, whenever there's a trigger happening, whenever there's some sort of you know, life event that we don't have any context for why it's like bringing about all these different emotions and all these reactions that were survival things from the past, essentially. So kind of understanding why they're doing what they're doing, most of the time understanding that it's like an act of protection or something. And then when we can kind of honor that, a lot of times those parts will then start allowing themselves to communicate and then kind of play their tune in right time with everything. So you kind of move through your day still as a multiple, but with the parts coming out when they need to, not having like kid parts being, you know, for myself being a tattoo artist, you know, it's something that is always been very triggering just for people for a living, you know, something that is triggering to me, you know, is the fact that I'm one-on-one with people, you know, is very triggering to parts that, you know, see it almost as like a sex work kind of event, you know. So having those parts show up when it's time to go to work is not ideal, you know. So you have to learn how to essentially give all the parts of yourselves like the time and space, you know, and acknowledge their needs, you know, and their motivations, you know, all of those different things. Like the more you can journal about it, different colors I use, you know, like different handwritings is going to happen. You know, the more you can kind of have like try and meet your system at a place of understanding and non-judgment, the faster you're going to get in your healing, you know, realistically, you know. For me, you know, that's it's always going to be the hardest to deal with the parts of you that are, you know, that cognitive dissonance. The parts of you that are most different from the front personality are going to be the hardest parts to understand, work with, and everything. But it's just like people, it's about having patience and taking time to cultivate that relationship. You know, for me, the thing that was very eye-opening was when my therapist wanted to give me the dissociative experiences scale, essentially. And I ended up taking it twice because the first time he was like, he had asked me about the test. And then when I was discussing the test, because I had scored kind of low on it, which is very common for DDNOS, because a lot of times we'll have a shell personality that kind of like is used to kind of smoothing, you know, the different alters coming out, because we tend to have a lot of them, you know, because there are a lot of different roles. So it smooths that, you know, makes it less detectable and everything. But, you know, talking to him about the test and realizing that I had been arguing about how we're going to and realizing that that wasn't a normal experience. But to me, you know, it's fish in the water. It's like I had always been used to having these three different parts of me always around, you know. So it was just like, you know, I just interpreted it as just like that's just how everyone thinks, you know what I mean? But then to realize, you know, I was there for anxiety, depression, PTSD symptoms, you know, and all the, you know, and flashbacky stuff kind of coming up, and then to realize that it was like, oh, like, you know, the anxiety, all that stuff was a lot of times a result of internal conflict between the different parts, because part of me is wanting me to put my priorities here, part of me is wanting to put my priorities here, part here, you know, and all of them have a different way of going about those things, and they all have like a dogged tunnel vision on like things. So it was just constant arguments, including, you know, a dissociative scale test, you know, like where I was literally trying to write the answer I wanted to, you know, and having another part of me that was, you know, that the gatekeeper, you know, part of me that was essentially telling me to stop being so dramatic and that like that, you know, that I was, you know, I was just being dramatic and manipulative or something like that. And even though it's like I wanted, part of me was like recognizing my experiences and wanting to write down it's like there was another part of me that literally held my hand back from marking the things that I wanted to, you know. And I was always my experience with that with the speech too. I always called it the funnel, you know. So my therapist starting to address me as multiple, you know, and us working on that and having that understanding, you know, he got a very one-sided, you know, Nathan, I think has talked about it before, like in college, you know, like people saw me as the person that could see beauty in anything. I was just compassionate and just like would not hurt a fly, you know what I mean? There was just, but on a certain level, my connection to life and myself was very shallow, you know, it's like I wasn't allowed to access the emotions, the normal emotions that people had in day-to-day life. You know, I kind of was kept in like this very, you know, overly optimistic state just so that I would stay focused, goal-oriented, focused, and all that kind of stuff, you know. So yeah, so I mean the experience for me like now is that, you know, if you can get that communication going, you know, you can have essentially access to most of those skills and different things like that. It's a part of you. I mean, there's nothing separate about the different parts. Essentially, it is all the same brain, you know, it's all the same soul that, you know, came from our, you know, from God, you know, essentially, and, you know, was, I believe, put here, every soul's put here to do some sort of job, you know what I mean? And if we can get like, you know, like Gray Nathan saying, you know, all the parts different lives that they lived to a degree, you know, and just get them all on the same page of like fighting the common enemy, like you said, you know, and really just, you know, focusing on, you know, survival now is a complete understanding and wholeness and communication and everything, because that's the only way that we can really protect ourselves against the abusers, you know, and also get to a place of healing, you know, where you can get to a place of groundedness, you know, and stability.
Great answers. Anybody have feedback? No? Going once, going twice? Okay. Good job, you guys. Those are really good answers. I think they'll be super helpful for people too. And on the end of people like me who haven't gone through it, it can be really confusing to try to think about these things and consider them. So I appreciate you guys really, you know, breaking down these hard things. Whether it's a survivor, an advocate listening, they can more understand things that may be new to them. Along those lines, another question that I got that I want to ask you guys: when healing, how did you take care to remember your traumas without refracturing? And I'm going to start with Nathan.
Oh, no. How do you not refracture? Sometimes you do, you know? Sometimes a whole new side of you just breaks the heck off because frick that. That's, I mean, you're like sitting in the therapist chair, hearing yourself talk to yourself about something you don't really remember, but then you remember so perfectly and explicitly that it's beyond your wildest, worst nightmare. And it's instantly all there, just pouring out of you. Like I can sit down and write anytime, day or night, the most unbelievable things instantly. It's all there. And at the same time, it's not there unless I actually sit down and do that, or I'm finally left alone. You know, like just leave me alone. And all of that's there. So I totally resonate with what you just said, Carrie, about just that ways of expressing it and bringing it out or letting it come out. I don't know, man. Sometimes it sucks because sometimes you literally are going to traumatize yourself in a like serious way, and you're going to come out of that now having to process it on your waking side, you know, the side that's supposed to be all goo and happy and like pleasant and like butterflies and joyful, you know, the side that's supposed to have the happy side, you know. And this is the hardest thing for me, is raising a family amidst this, because I basically shelved a lot of aspects of my healing because the constant interruptions with having children, having babies and stuff is so disrupting to that flow that normally like the process of writing it out, getting in, letting that other side of me speak, allowing myself to speak, allowing myself to like rip open a very horribly deep, festering, infected wound. Like you think it's been painful to dig out splinters. Like we are trying to perform surgery on ourselves, unanesthetized surgery on ourselves, blind. It's groping inside of the most tender, delicate areas of our physical body, spiritual soul body, trying to undo a spider's web amidst that. It's extremely complicated. It's very difficult, especially in the beginning phases of it. And in the beginning phases of it, it's very traumatic. It's very traumatic. It's very overwhelming. And it's like, I got a lot of what's called flooding, where you just get an inundation with a tremendous amount of information all at once. And you think you're going to die. Like, you feel like you're going to die from the quantity of sorrow that you suddenly experience, that you are utterly lost in sorrow. Like, and I would just sit there in this just unutterable brokenness, crying in my dog's neck, and then trying to somehow shift gears to go work, and be like, okay, let's go work now. Like, no, I've never cried so much in like a 6-month period. I mean, longer than that. Like, so much crying. And you're like, yeah, switch parts, go for it. And you're like, okay. So it's really difficult. How do you keep from re-traumatizing yourself or re-splitting? I don't know. I'm super prone to do that as it is, just as a baseline when it comes to certain things, like in particularity, like the sound of screaming children and such. So like there's a lot of resistance as it is to just stay whole. There's a lot of resistance, like the switch or the passivity side of it, or like the fade is what I call it in the book. Like that fade was just so natural. I didn't even know it was what it was until later on. Like, I just thought that's exactly how everybody else did it. I thought that's how everybody else handled life. That's how I thought people got through every day. I used to dissociate and split off pieces of myself because I had to take a test because I was bored in class. Like, just there was very basic, it was just like as natural as breathing to me. So it's taken a lot of really intentional like focus, like asking the Father to please like intercede for me, to help me to not be like that, like sometimes healing sessions are super easy, super wonderful. Even though they're painful, they're not that painful. They're not that dark. But then you got other times where it is so dark, you stop in the middle of it and you're like, there's no way, I can't. And then you pick it up and then you deal with the rejection of yourself, you deal with the rejection of your past, you deal with that. Like you're spitting in the face of your friend and when they're showing you their greatest weaknesses and their greatest vulnerabilities. So it requires a radical form of acceptance that takes deliberate intentionality. I studied psychology for years and years and years, trying to learn from some of the best people in the industry how to get free without ever asking them how to help me, because I have DID. There was no way I could say those words to those people for a long time. And then when I did, I got to experience scourge of public mockings, to a very long, arduous, still continues to this day, difficult journey of that. And so once you get to the place where you can accept yourself as you are yourselves, as a we and not an I, it helps tremendously. But then you have to continue to do so along the way. So how do I keep from splitting? Deliberate abstinence. But it's not a guarantee, and that's okay. That's not bad. We are survivors, and that means sometimes we're going to just keep on doing what we've been doing for a long time to keep on getting through this, because you know what? There's a lot of people that can't handle a half-inch deep level of our discussion here. And for all three of us right now, we could go so much deeper that you would lose your mind in moments. So that's the way it is.
Thank you, Nathan. Carrie?
Yeah, that was an man. Yeah, I definitely feel the same way. I mean, I feel like I'm constantly in that conundrum as well, so maybe that's normalizing for whoever asked the question, to know that on a certain level, when you're dealing with this kind of stuff, it's kind of impossible not to have a certain level, of intensity or fracturing. But one thing I would kind of like to come back to is I have always gotten a lot of help out of Allison Miller's book, essentially Becoming Yourself. And she has some great YouTube videos too. But one thing that she does talk about that I do tend to use in my process and have for a long time, interesting enough, like a version of it even before I learned out about her, is learning how to use the dissociation in your favor, essentially, and to, to bring in all the parts that are involved in the memory, but also to have a way of essentially choosing, like willingly choosing to dissociate and compartmentalize like certain aspects of the memory. For me, it's typically, you know, screams. So sound related stuff is usually like the hardest, you know, and I was gonna say should I call it? So usually sound related stuff, and then emotions, obviously, you know, so like, so despair, you know, and disgust and fear and anger and all that kind of stuff is usually the overwhelming parts of things. So sometimes it's helpful to like experience it, you know, some for the memory, but not necessarily have it get in the way of being able for all the parts to share. So sometimes I think maybe using the dissociation in your favor is a great way to work on memory processing, you know, which is just to essentially allow each part to have like some sort of container to put the respective, you know, emotion or pain sensation, you know, sound, whatever it is, you know, into, so that they can, you know, share with the other parts in the front, you know, what the content of the memory is, but essentially you're able to kind of come back to like the more intense parts in little bits as opposed, but it's a little bit easier to once you have the whole context of like what went on in the memory and everything. So and then the other thing for me when it comes to dealing with I guess dealing with like the most intense memories and everything like that, and being able to like get it out, you know, like being able to verbalize it, being able to write about it, being able to, you know, in my case, paint about it. Like that for me is really how I came about starting to do the painting, you know, the journaling that I share with everyone. You know, I, as an artist, I'm like classically trained like portrait artist. Like everything I do is like very technical, you know, very realistic and everything. But when, for me, it's really like I had mentioned before about meeting the parts where they're at, you know, and essentially just kind of intuitively asking how, you know, the part of you that's flooding, the part of you that's dealing with all the trauma, you know, that you're dealing with in the flashback, you know, how they want to communicate, because a lot of times it might not be what you initially think. And for me, that's why I started doing the watercoloring, you know, because for that part, a lot of times it's very young and everything. So trying to sit down and trying to have that part put into words what they went through, you know, just to try to like, you know, essentially get out the worst part of the memory. And because everything's so visual and so all this stuff, it's like, it just felt like we'd have pages and pages and pages trying to explain, you know, like all these little details that to that part were so important because it's like such a traumatic event, you know, and little visual things, you know, or just describing the setting sometimes can just take like ages to feel like that part feels understood, you know. So for me, it really was like that part was like watercolor. That's what I need. And I fucking have always hated watercolor as an artist because it's so like flowy and unpredictable. And like I'm a technical person. I like to be like, you know, like on point. I don't like flowy crap, you know, when it comes when it comes to art, you know. If I do nature, it's like I want it to look like what it is I'm painting, you know. That's where I see the beauty of God, you know, in any case, you know. But for that part, you know, it really was just like if we could very quickly, you know, almost like automatic, you know, writing, you know, automatic painting, you know, maybe for someone it might be finger paints, you know, or it might be markers or something like that, crayons, you know. For me, it was watercolor because so many of the memories had a lot of liquid elements because of the blood and, you know, bodily fluids and all that kind of, and how quickly we could get a lot of color, you know, onto the paper. Essentially, that was what we needed, you know, to, and still is, you know, the number one tool, at least for me, in my toolbox for if I have a memory, you know, flashback, you know, flooding stuff that is really plaguing me, you know, and I'm having a really difficult time flipping that switch back to normal life, you know, and it's incessant. That part is screaming out for help because they've been stuck in this dungeon of torture for 30 years, you know what I mean? And it's time, you know, finally to share this, you know, whether or not, you know, and I have to have the front person, I'm an adult, I have to have the courage, you know, to save that little kid, you know, And so for me, it's like taking the time, and literally having to find, my mom to be a babysitter, like so that, like Nathan says, we can open that box, because most of the time we don't even want to stick our toes into it because it feels like we're going to be overwhelmed with like a ocean of blood and sadness and everything like that. So it's like, having some time, to open that box, to do those paintings, to do that journaling, to do that kind of stuff, is one of the most important things I would say, for people is like, so find the way the part needs to communicate, whatever that is, and just go with your gut, and try your hardest to find some time, to actually set aside to do it, and let those parts like know that it is in priority, and that, they were shoved into like the corners of your mind by your abusers, for decades and everything, but that you're not interested in playing that game anymore, and that you are a rescuer like that. And one more thing I would say is like the baseball bat. The baseball bat. So a lot of people find the thing that's the most difficult, including myself, to deal with in the memories is going to be your overwhelming sadness, and it's once you've cried all the cries, and like screamed and done all those things, on a certain level, we have to acknowledge that sadness and hurt and self-destructiveness comes from suppressed anger. And for most of us survivors, anger is like the one emotion that was toxic to our abusers, and the one emotion they made sure that we were never, ever, 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 ever allowed to direct anywhere except in towards ourselves or at a specific target, that they had chosen, essentially. And in my experience, overwhelming sadness, the only thing that really, it's great to get the images out, to get the journaling out, and to get all of that out. But really, the only thing that moves that internal heaviness, that sadness, that is very easy to, when we're having a bad day, turn back around on ourselves into shame and self-hatred and all this stuff, that we did, and that we know we were a part of, and we know we witnessed and couldn't do anything about, and still cannot forgive ourselves for even that. You know what I mean? Like when you can move your body in a way that expresses that anger, when you can use your voice in a way that expresses that anger, whether that's, finding some space that you can punch a pillow and just tell your abusers what a piece of shit they are, and it's going to feel like you're dying at first. I have to tell you, for most abuse victims, trying to access that anger is going to make it feel like you're literally, it's going to feel like the last thing in the world you want to do, because you're so used to that emotion immediately coming up and being directed inwards into this self-destructive, suicidal, spot. But what ends up happening is the more you direct that anger to where it belongs, to the abusers, the closer you're going to get to forgiving yourself, the closer you're going to get to forgiving them. To be honest, because on a certain level, I think that's the key that's holding a lot of survivors back, is we try and get to forgiveness before we've allowed ourselves to access and express our anger, which is a very natural emotion for what we've had. We stay stuck in directing it towards ourselves and not giving back, really giving back the shame and acknowledging, and for me, it's like I never got to a place of that kind of forgiveness, of that kind of being able and save myself from that shame and that self-hatred and everything, until I was able to hit a punching by all a recommendation of, a therapist, just hit a punching bag over and over while telling my abusers what they were, and visualizing every memory that I had, me walking into that memory with my bat, with my knife, with whatever it was, and seeing that little me and those little other kids wreaking havoc on all those, once you get to that place, like you're able to do something with sadness, you're able to do something with what's going to come up, you're going to be able to do something with all the self-hatred that comes up, because it's going to come up over and over, and we're going to go through this. If you've gone through this stuff over and over, with each level of crap you deal with, it's going to come up again, and you're going to have to forgive yourself again, and you're going to have to learn how to deal with all the intensity of the sounds, and, you know, the everything, you know, you're going to have to deal with it and find a way to do it, you know, like without shattering. And these are the ways that I think you do it, is you have to look at every tool in your toolkit, you know, every bit in your arsenal, you know, without judgment, you know, and, you know, as long as you're not hurting someone else, you know what I mean, and neglecting your life and everything, you're going to be, just give yourself some, you know, and give yourself what you need, you know, even if it's treating yourself like a kid and allowing yourself to have some playtime, you know what I mean? Like it really is, it's about being holistic, you know, in a way we were never allowed to be, you know, be angry when we should be angry, be sad when we should be sad, you know, all that stuff. So, you know, it's a journey, you know, and you're gonna shatter, you know, some, but as long as you know how to pick up the pieces, like I think that, you know, you can stay positive and move in the right direction.
Thank you, Carrie. That was an awesome answer. Gray?
Wow, that was amazing, both of y'all.
Oh, Nathan's getting dressed. Here we go.
No.
Oh, it's going
Measure in
down.
my head. Hang it.
So, healing without refracturing, or just addressing the element of refracturing or regenerative programming, so on and so forth. The way I look at it is there's a few elements here. You have parts of yourself. You have your perception and inner self-talk and how you truly feel about these parts of yourself. Then you have external other people. Are they supportive? How do they feel about this? How do you have to act around them? Then you have a job. How do you have to act when you go to this job? What are the boundaries within this job? And typically the job will go hand in hand with feeding yourself and things that you need. So obviously things don't always go as planned, and when you are doing work, you can get flooding, which not only you will get flooding, and that can really lead to a lot coming in that kind of forces yourself to wall off. And let's be honest, refracturing, that's an interesting word. There's a continuum, there's a spectrum of, you know, hey, I'm letting this part out. Oop, I can't function like this. I can't exist like this. These people can't handle this. I can't go to work like this. This is freaking me out. It goes back in. Not necessarily like it re-splintered you into a bunch of pieces, but there's a continuum of when you're dealing with parts. And, you know, here's how I look at it. You know, first and foremost, if you know, hey, I was programmed, I have split personalities, I have DID, DDNOS, whatever semantics, whatever terminology, jargon you want to use, that's obviously irrelevant. We all know what we're talking about. So we say, hey, I know what's in here. I might not feel it right now. It might feel surreal. It might feel unreal. I might be a little bit in denial. There might be a little bit of dissonance, but I know what's in here. And I know what levels of horrible is going to be. And even if you don't know, just imagine. It's the worst. It's worse than you could imagine. It's the worst. It's the worst feeling of despair, of anger, of shame, everything. And what's worse is sometimes you don't experience the feelings kind of together. You will feel them wholly and separately, so they can even pull you in different directions. Here's what I do to try not to refracture, to try to deal with this. I say, look, you know, I already look at it and just say, I'm going to be fine with anything. I don't care if a part of me gets in the mood for something that usually disgusts me. It doesn't mean we're necessarily going to partake in it. But what I am going to do is allow myself to feel. I am going to allow myself. I'm not going to try to lie to myself. I'm not going to try to fight it. I'm going to be honest with myself. Say, this is who I am. It doesn't have to be like this forever. It feels like this was yesterday, even when it's coming up. It was 10, 20, 30 years ago, right? But it's in there. So the first is self-perception and self-talk. Don't you dare beat yourself up. Don't be angry at yourself. Be allowing, be forgiving, be understanding. And understanding of yourself is understanding of others too. It really goes hand in hand with your view of the whole thing. If you understand how people are messed up, you understand how you're messed up, and everybody gets a chance. And that, you know, I mean, if you're looking to a high power, for example, that God's not there to judge you and hate you and be angry at you. He's there to love you and accept you and to heal you. So you have to be willing to look at yourself and accept and have that positive self-talk no matter what, and just be willing to deal with it no matter how messy it is. Then you're branching from internal to external. And whenever this stuff's coming up, because you're not always going to be planning, okay, I'm going to sit down and work on this and it's going to come out like this. Please. It's going to happen how it happens, even if you're good at eliciting it or, controlling it. Who's around you? And unfortunately, not everybody has somebody around them that will be able to accept who they are. I mean, normal people that don't have split personalities or whatever hide parts of themselves too from society. Society's not very allowing. It's not very forgiving. They're not very nice. They're upset with themselves. They take it out on others, so on and so forth. It can be a cold, hard world out here, especially when you're a grown man coming out as a child or having negative tendencies in a bunch of ways, or just you can be a lot for someone. So, aside from the internal self-talk, self-perception, allowance, forgiving, understanding, now you have external, the same thing, but with someone else. Who are you around? Do you have a support system? Are they going to be able to deal with you? Yes, you can't dive in 100%, but that this is something you have to consider. Then also is responsibilities. It's not just who is in your household, who is close, who's your support system. It's, okay, I have to venture out into the world and work. Maybe you have some money set aside and all that, and you can really have time to act it out, and you won't have to refracture yourself. But let me tell you, if right now it breaks down and I relive being raped as a child, I got to pull it up and go to work tomorrow. Do you understand? I have to work the register. That's not trying to happen. So you force yourself into this. So unfortunately, the reality of it is you have to be realistic with where are you in life? How deep can you go, and how much time do you have to deal with it? Because unfortunately, the deeper you go and the more you deal with, if you have to go to work tomorrow, it's going to be a problem, and it's going to cause refracturing, and you may not even be able to separate it back that quick. It can turn into a mess. But the thing is, you have to worry about how you deal with it internally, how they deal with it externally, and then duties outside of your exact support system. And then the last part, in my opinion, I mean, there's more parts, but the last part is, what is your long-term plan? Do you have an outlet? You need to have an outlet to express this, because when these parts come back up, the reason it's most refracturing is because it feels like it happened yesterday, and you're going to want to do something now. It's vitally important. You need to do it. You have all this rage. You have all this anger. You have all this sorrow, despair, depression. It's just, you're ripped apart from the inside. It feels like you lost everything that ever was. Like, how do you deal with that? You need to have some things prepared. Hey, if I feel like this, here's a list of 3 activities I can do. Okay? Whether it's journaling, whether it's beating a punching bag with a bat because they don't want to break my wrist again, whether it's, whatever it is, you need to have some sort of game plan going into this. Here's the thing is, if you're here, you know what's going on most likely. So you need to have a game plan. And even if you're adverse to writing or making lists or something, have a game plan for things you can do to get out anger that are low impact without hurting yourself. Like I said, I used to punch the punching bag, and if you're really going out, you can start to lose form, hurt your wrist or something. A bat's pretty good, something like that. I used to run, that started hurting. Swimming's great. It's much harder to hurt yourself when you're swimming. That's beautiful, and it's also like being out in nature. Okay, having someone close to love you and accept these parts of you that are so messed up, and making sure that you communicate who you're with. Hey, when this thing comes out, just so you know, what goes hand in hand with these parts coming forward is the first time you meet this part, it's going to take everything it knows about you and formulate it into the most offensive, most despicable attack on you that you've ever heard. And it is going to try to repel you, and it is going to try to push you away. And that's scary. I know I've pushed people away, and it's scary, and it hurts. But if you have someone that says, okay, we know what we're dealing with, that's the step number 1. If you want to prevent refracturing, get a game plan and know what you're dealing with, and make sure that you have good communication with the people that are around you. Not everybody's ready to get into this, So, having a positive self-affirmation, positive perspective on yourself, having positive support, having a game plan ahead of time, and trying to find some sort of employment or having some saved up money to where you don't have to snap into like retail mode or something. Because here's the deal is, no matter what you deal with these parts, people talk about healed, all this. That's not erasing your history. No matter what I do, I was raised killing people. I was raised watching people killed in front of me. I'll never be fit for a regular job. And unfortunately, there's a degree of separation and a degree of disassociation, or if you will, refract. Is that really refracturing? No, when the part comes out, I have to put it back up. It's just standard dissociation. To me, it's not even refracturing. It's just, why am I going to bring that part to the retail store? But the more time, the more game plan you have, the more outlet you can have, you can give it more time. That atmospheric sensitivity decreases, you know? And I don't like using the word desensitized, but more getting used to it. And you kind of, and I'm sensitive about words I use, but you kind of bleed off some of that excess emotion and all that. Instead of bottling it up and storing it, you let it experience things in a controlled setting. So you need to love yourself. You need to have someone that loves you, or you need to be around people that will not hate you and push you away and put you through more traumatic situations when they meet parts of you. So you need to have a game plan. You need to make sure that it experiences love and doesn't experience disgust or hate or other people, and you need to have an outlet. And then again, you need to either have some sort of self-sustenance, some money saved up, something like that, right? Someone that can help take care of you, or a job to where you can live with it and do something. I mean, even if you're stuck working 9 to 5, I mean, I've been there for a while. I was at a warehouse. I would just tape boxes in the corner. It's a lot different from working the register and having to, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, oh, sorry, yes, that's my fault that you ordered this. And you know what I mean? So it's just really about being realistic about what's in you, how other people deal with it, how you deal with it, and, what you need to get out here over time. So, it's about your own image and how you look at yourself, how other people around you are any job and responsibilities you have, and outlet. And I mean, all you can do is the best you can. But if you're running into this thing without a game plan, you better believe that things are going to come out that you have to put back in, and it's going to be hard on yourself. But it is a process. Healing is a process, and becoming something. It's not erasing your history. And there are certain realistic limitations. It's not like, oh, I went through it, boom, I'm fine, normal guy back in society. No. And I hate to tell you that society's not that healthy anyways at the current state of things. So love yourself, love others, find someone that loves you, and find healthy things to do with the abundance of energy and emotion that you have. And then hopefully you won't have to hide all that. And the more you can be yourself, the less intense of yourself you will have to be in all these parts all at once. And then, you can slowly be more yourself. And like Alice Miller would say, you can become yourself.
Good answer. Do you guys have any feedback on each other?
I'm just so glad. I'm just so glad you said you can't erase that history, because I think I had a very optimistic perspective on how long it would take me to heal initially. That was a terrible false expectations are who die first. All those people that believe that you're getting out after 6 months or a year, they die first every time. Hope deferred makes the heart sick. Another way of saying that is hoping in something that's not going to be fruitful will kill you. That's one side of it. And I think I hoped initially that I could heal completely before Naomi was born. I was like, dude, I'm an extremist. I'm going to apply everything to this. You watch, son. I'm going to heal completely. And then the other thing you said that was just absolutely critical for me was sometimes, maybe it was you, Carrie. Sometimes you forgive before the anger is addressed. One of you said that. And dude, dang. Yeah. I went back to these people and was like, I forgive you. I sat in front of my abusers and was like, I forgive you. And then later on, I learned a whole lot more to the story. And I'm like, forgive you? I've got other things in store for you, son. Come back around my house sometime again. I dare you. It's just, So those are super helpful, encouraging words to just go ahead and say. And you're right. It's not refracturing. That's correct. It's not refracturing. You're just shoving yourself back in the box a lot. And you got to do that. You literally got to lock it down. You got to lock it down because you got to be a high functioning individual, regardless of the circumstances that you're in. And that's something that, frankly, we've all done well enough to get through life, long enough to get us here. And you've got to continue to maintain that. You got to maintain that. Having children, I have lived with my family every day and night for 7 years. It has been very difficult because this percolates to the surface inevitably. And it's just like, why is dad grumpy? I never was grumpy before all this. That's what's so hard, you know? Like, I wasn't pissed all the time, but now I'm pissed all the time. And that's so unpleasant. Like, you got to find that outlet. I tell you what, man, I like your bat idea. I've got a bat too. This is my bat. I really like this one. So I am telling you, people don't like it at the gym, but this is a really good one for the forest. This is a really good one that's very sharp for the forest, and it helps me a lot. Like, I remember, man, Chelsea would walk in on me in the kitchen. I would be in my underwear and 5 fingers and those like little rubber toe shoes. And I would be just swinging a knife in all kinds of ridiculous combative stances and she would just watch me like, what is this? You know? And like, it just felt so freaking good to get back to it and have the power in my hand again. You know what I'm saying? Like you said, just screaming and spitting and cussing and just tearing into these things. Like those were all very helpful tools. I didn't even consider how outlandish they might perceived from the outside world until Chelsea would see me in those moments. And then like you said, man, that was just really helpful. Thank you all for saying those things. It's great to talk to other survivors, like for real, this style. Yeah. This is really helpful.
Yeah. Were you gonna say something, Carrie?
No, I was just gonna kind of piggyback on Gray and Nathan now, you know, and just kind of reiterate, you know, like that, you know, you're gonna have a lot of energy coming up and it's gonna need to get expressed in some way, you know, and just really not, like, as long as you're not being destructive, you know, just not judging yourself if you're, you know, going and using the things you need. Like Nathan was saying, you know, it's like some parts, little kid parts, they feel like they cannot stop flashing those horrible images in my head until I have a version of it that does it justice, you know, on the paper, essentially, you know. And it's the same for the assassin parts. If you have that kind of stuff, you know, that part was not satisfied until we had a knife that we felt we could properly defend ourselves with, essentially. Something that we, in our visualizations, we could actually picture using on our abuser if they popped their fucking shitty little head, you know, into our shop or something like that, you know. And it's crazy to people, you know, like, especially people in my life, you know, like, have never seen me as the person that's going to the shooting range, you know, to blast up a few rounds with the Glock, you know. That's not who they see, like, me as, you know, as typically, you know what I mean? Like, but this is like, you know, that is my experience, you know, with having some integration, you know, and kind of keeping things together from the refracturing, you know, is to constantly try and have all the things around that makes all the parts of you know what I mean, and not say it, you know, because, you know, if part of me needs to carry around a little arsenal, you know what I mean? And like, you know, like I used to judge myself that I, you know, would go into locations and I was just like, what is this? That it's like, I'm just thinking about escape routes, like, you know what I mean? Different scenarios, like risk analysis, where it's like, well, like if I were to jump out the window, would that be better than the, you know, just so much shit, you know? And I'm just like, I'm just a crazy person, you know, versus, you know, to just get to the point where you can acknowledge that all these thoughts are in your head for a fucking reason, and just like stop fighting yourself and start to like embrace all those parts of yourself and flow with it, and just go through your day trying to, you know, get that energy out and express it in the ways that you need. You know, when that part came out, I had to do 20 push-ups. Like, that's almost nothing, you know, but still, this is like, that's what I need to do to get my head straight. If I needed to get my head straight, that was the thing, you know. And it's like I said, like, I've never been a physically athletic person. I've always been a bookworm. I've always been an artist and all that, but the other part, different story, so it really is about honoring all the parts of your story, not trying to ignore your past and be like, I would just rather be happy, and chill, on a certain level. If you have it, you do need to, embrace it, and you're going to experience a lot less of that internal fracturing conflict, like animosity, and that's, sorry, that was it, just the outlet thing is the most important.
Thank you guys. Those are awesome, awesome answers. Do you guys have energy for one or two more questions? Two? Okay.
Well, I
Irma.
haven't heard anything from the family yet, so I think I'm still good to go.
Okay. I was gonna say, I want to be respectful of all your time. I know some of you guys have
Third
little,
shift starts
so.
in 4 hours anyways. It doesn't matter at this point.
So we'll do two more questions, and then I still have a lot more, so I'd love to do another one of these. But the next question that I'm going to ask is, what have you seen that is wrong within the therapeutic community, and what positive actions need to happen within the therapeutic community for victims and survivors to receive the help they need to heal? And I'm going to start with Carrie.
So I think that having less issues with spirituality, in modern therapy would be one of the things for sure, like, just because people have gone through a lot of spiritual abuse a lot of times. And I think that having therapists that choose to stay purely on the psychological aspect of things is kind of, like, in my experience, like, alienating to survivors, slash a lot of times doesn't really look at like the complete picture, but just, I mean, I really think it's just more therapists becoming aware of it and everything. In the therapy community, I have kind of like mixed feelings, because it seems like Gray had mentioned before in his stuff that it's like, it's either seems to be people that are incredibly motivated and helpful, or people that are themselves, either DID and unknowingly working for the network, or psychopaths that are knowingly working for the network. So I kind of, because I run into constantly the issue of sometimes being exposed to shady people or something like that, and then it's really hard to like open up. Is my experience has been that pretty much all my memory work has been done solo, essentially, and it's really helpful to have a therapist that's knowledgeable about this. So I would recommend finding one, even if you have to go remotely, to find someone that understands what you're dealing with and is going to take you seriously and everything. But in my experience, that's part of why I always come back to Allison Miller and everything, is that you never are going to know how to find sometimes a reliable therapist or a safe therapist or anything. So in my experience, getting in the habit of being able to deal with things as they come up on your own, and having, your own, like Gray mentioned, your own kind of process figured out on like how you deal with destabilization, how you deal, with bringing parts of, fold into it, and dealing with self-forgiveness, all those things is kind of, for me, like what I come back to is that, it'd be nice if more therapists were educated, but I do like to come back to survivors being able to learn how to do the work essentially on their own, and not necessarily always relying on the outside validation, although it is helpful of other therapists. But yeah, it's hard to say. The industry in general is like pretty
Gray?
Yeah, this one I'll probably be short on, because this one, dovetails. So, I mean, what are we asking? What's wrong with the therapy community? What could they do better?
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there's an aspect of infiltration. That obviously is a major thing. And I mean, there's such serious taboo and stigma to addressing these things, that these therapists, for example, Carrie mentioned that, you know, some maybe not being quite equipped or ready to address the spirituality aspect. Well, part of that, in my opinion, is because the taboo and stigma and of them being attacked in the past, from, you know, from the satanic panic, false memory syndrome to now, you know, more just like any official confirmation of a realistic narrative of what's actually going on in this world is strictly forbidden. You know, they better not even start to dabble with that. Therapists are losing license. You know this. It's, you know, it's a thing. So, I mean, the taboo and stigma have to go, and they have to be left to actually, you know, genuinely try to help fully without having to dance around certain things. Because, I mean, how can you be effective when you're dancing around things, especially when one of the things you're dancing around needs to be addressed? I mean, it's so, you know, so obviously infiltration, taboo, and stigma. I mean, other than that, what do they need? I'll be honest, in my opinion, in the current state of things, yeah, you want someone with that specializes in trauma and dissociation, but you really just want to find someone that you're comfortable with, that cares, and that you can realistically be with long term. Because it gets ugly when you're switching up parts of your system, go off. Parts of your system open up to one. They don't want to open up to the next person, because guess what? It might come to an end again after all this, you know? And it's just so frustrating. And it's just, you know, another aspect is, unfortunately, a lot of these therapists are not realistic and not respectful. Let me explain. If I come into your office ahead of time and I say, hey, you know, I have this background, blah, 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 and, you know, I've spent a lot of time and money on therapy, and what I'm not looking to do is spend a lot of money and time just to find out that, you know, it's not a good fit. And then, you know, that's actually realistically probably going to do more damage than not. I was like, I understand, take a few sessions to even feel each other out. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about if it's 6 months in, that egg cracks, and then we're talking about the serious stuff that's plaguing me, and then all of a sudden, whoa, if you know you can't handle combat trauma, if you know you can't handle sexual trauma, if you know you can't handle this, you have no business treating these people. I'm sorry, but I have had people wildly irresponsible, and I have seen them. I mean, I've obviously dealt with a lot of therapists and all that, but most of my healing was done without therapy. I had a very bad experience because, unfortunately, I couldn't find anybody to address the issues that I had, and I ended up going to the Soldier Center, which was, you know, billed as the Marriage and Family Institute. You know, long story short, was the CIA place. And I mean, woo, did it mess me up. But I had spent so much time dealing with other people that finally we'd get to it and they'd be like, whoa, this is way too much. And I should be like, oh, I should have known, because, you know, you're a sweet little old lady, but like, this is way too much for you. And I can see in your eyes that you're scared. Well, yeah. I can't, even if you were willing to deal with it, once I see that you're scared of me, I can't deal with you. It makes me feel guilty. It makes me feel horrible. So like, the people, being realistic, and knowing, you know, not biting off more than they can chew. They need to have, you know, they need that goes hand in hand with being educated, though. So anyways, infiltration, taboo, stigma, you know, lack of proper training, which is largely because of aforementioned. So, I mean, that's about it.
Great answer.
Oh yeah.
Nathan.
That was awesome. That was
Right?
so good.
Good.
Dang, man. That was so good. That's exactly what that
What he
feels
said.
like. What he said. Especially that part about, now that I'm halfway through this entire process of finally showing you what I actually am. And then that's the action. That's where it all actually matters. You know, all we're ever doing is probing people. That's it. We're like literally perpetually probing humankind to see whether or not they're physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually capable of even accepting us at all. At the end of the day, that's it. We're like so survival minded because we've recognized so many times, we've had so much patterning in our life that like it's made, like if we're still alive at this point, it's because we became very capable at pattern recognition. And one of those things you find out very early on is how much people are physically, they can handle. And so many of them are so incessantly weak and it's so ridiculously soft that they can't handle anything about you except for, you know, the goody two-shoe side of you. And so it's like, you're just going to waste each other's time when I finally have the voluntary option to choose whether or not to participate in a therapeutic program with another individual. I'm just a lot more abrupt and abrasive initially to find out if I can take like a real coarse sanding belt to their face emotionally, and just go ahead and discover what's underneath, like what's underneath there. You know, you got 4 layers of skin there, and then I'm going to get to these subcutaneous layers, then I'm going to get to this fat, then I'm going to get to these other like vital blood vessels and all these, like I'm going to dissect you emotionally, you know. Very like, let's just put it what it is. We know how to dissect human beings. They've all said it in different kind of ways. Well, mine was a lot more psychologically at times, obviously very much viscerally at times. But once you start to really, like, the reason I was in that psychology field and studying around in there is because I was probing defenses. I was like probing and testing, where are the actual toughest people on the earth? Because inherently that's what I'm looking for. I need to find people that are as tough as I am, that are as tough as a warrior as they are as a lover, you know, as a friend, as a companion, as a healer. You know, I married a nurse for a reason. My wife, her favorite thing to do was wound care. And I was like, ding, that sets off a totally different level of strength. Like that when I find that out about somebody else, that they like a paramedic, I'm inherently like curious about people like that, because I understand I could start to divulge to them ritualistic suicide, and they can track with me because they've cleaned it up. You know what I'm saying? They have a level of balls and like chutzpah and like tenaciousness that allows them to endure when everyone else quits. Like, who signs up to paramedic school, y'all? Think about it. Think about it for a second. There's a lot of you who've watched it, who are watching this, who'll be like, what the heck? Never once crossed my mind. I'd be like, exactly. You have no business being in this field with any of us. You can't handle us even remotely. Like, so get like toughen up or get the heck out of our way, because we don't have time to deal with any of you. At the end of the day, you want to try to help us, get the heck out of our way. Stop acting like you're actually willing to listen to us when you really won't. When at the end of the day, when we actually divulge who we are to you, you run. Just like everybody else. And you perpetuate the trauma that, you know what, you're not safe. You're not safe. You're not safe. You're not safe. Go back in the box in the closet where you came from, because the world's not ready for you. And at the end of the day, we have no time to deal with this stuff, because real life people, men, women, children, real people, carnal flesh and blood people you see at the store are being tortured, traumatized, and sold as if they are animals every single day and night, while you're like, well, that's kind of scary. I just can't handle that right now. Go back to sleep and get out of our way. We don't need you in this fight. You have no business. Go back to the trench you're asleep in, because you know what? There's a real war being waged every single day in the night, and it devours the lives of the innocent, and it preys upon your softness. And you know what? We need people to brace their constitution up. We need tougher men and women. And you know what? This is why we've systemically been bred down to this debased, animalistic, instinct-driven, like, fear and avoidance. And it's just cowardice everywhere. And it literally says cowards are not getting into that kingdom. I don't want to be a part of any kind of long-term living plan where people are inherently cowards. And when I find them, I just went through this with the previous community of people that like I opened up to, like really opened up to, like developed a real bond of trust with. And like inherently I saw cowardice at the end when they were tested about whether or not do they go along with the conspiracy of silence, or do they stand up in absolute juxtaposition to it. And and it's always that's the kingdom of compromise moment of your life. You've been tested. Are you going to compromise and go back to sleep and go along with this agenda to just put the schmear mask over everything else and be like, it's fine if we don't talk about it. It's fine if we don't talk about it. Just keep the secrets. And if you just go along with that filthy, disgusting, weak agenda, you know what? We're coming for your legs sooner or later. You're going to fall into the net, son. And just, we need therapists that are freaking warriors. And you know what? The ones that I have met, there are a few, they are. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I never even interacted with Russ Dizdar, but a little bit. He was never my therapist. He was never like a therapist kind of guy. But you know what? There was lots of other little therapists that I interviewed along the way, whether they knew it or not. I have been interviewing humankind since the day I was born, and I'm finding out whether or not they're strong or weak. And I am only interested in finding the elite. because the version of the elite, they can look like gutter trash that's been spit on and kicked out all the time. Like they look like the rejects pile, and I love them. They are the leftovers. They are the has-beens, the cast-overs, the cast-offs. They are the most beautiful, marvelous, overlooked treasures I've ever seen in the earth, and I love them dearly because every time I look at them, I see on their body the marks of an overcomer, the marks of someone who is not willing to compromise, even if that meant they destroyed themselves. They mute, like I have so many physical marks on my flesh I can look at any time to remind myself, yep, you're a mess. And I love looking at messy people. I love looking at them. I love looking at them because they are so real and they're everywhere. They're everywhere. And we really need counselors. We really need friends. That's what they're called. I think the other word for it is family. You know, not the perverse version like Carrie's talking about and what I'm talking about and what Gray's talking about. We're not looking for that. We're looking for something we've never known a day in our life, which is authenticity, love, genuineness, and boldness. No fear, because it says perfect love casts out fear. So if we can actually have a sincere foundation of love within people, like people for each other, love for your neighbor, it's this freaky, weird concept. If we can actually have that when our neighbor is the psychopath, when our neighbor is literally only ever known evil continually their whole life, and they want to divulge that to you, that's because they trust you. That's a huge deal. And if someone can trust you enough with their darkest, most painful moments, you know what? You need to be willing to wash them in truth. And if it's scary, we're not saying you can't be scared a little, but just don't let that fear govern your decisions and make you avoid us any longer, because we have a story that needs to be heard. And you know what? You are the people that we are entrusting that opportunity. We're sharing the greatest vulnerabilities of our life. And with that, you can try to destroy us with it. And you know what? At the end of the day, we're going to come down and eat your lunch sooner or later. So why don't we hang out and have a meal together instead of fighting this war against each other?
And I just want to say, if it was a battle for a lunch, I would not want to battle any of you for it.
We're
Does
hungry.
anybody have any feedback on any of that?
I've heard Nathan talk about food. I'm the same.
That was amazing.
Ooh, I'm hungry.
I bet.
Fresh milled grain.
You know it. I made it myself.
I gotta get on
I've been
y'all's
doing that for
level. I haven't
3
had
months now.
Way
3
to
months.
go,
I've-
Carrie.
Bread.
3 months I've been a Millenite. I've always been a baker, and I always felt fucking guilty about what I made for food. You know and it was like mind blowing to find Sue Becker through you and be like, wait, I can do all the things I want to do and turn it into health food. Like, mind blown.
Awesome. Go get them.
Any more feedback on the therapeutic question?
Yeah, they should do better.
More courage.
Satanists
No,
need to leave
there's
too.
good
They need to
people.
go.
There's good people. They got it stacked against them.
Yeah, they do.
They got it stacked against them because, you know, the real good therapists, you're going to have a few that have really healed, but that gets sketchy too. And then the rest are usually just people that had a client, found out what it was, and really cared. Because, you know, it's not the sort of thing you dabble in. You know, you don't dabble
There are
in
amazing
something
ones out there.
this much.
100%. All right, you guys, the last question that I have for you. What are your thoughts on forgiveness, and what advice would you give to people who feel as if forgiveness means agreeing with their abuse or abusers? Carrie, you want to go first?
Sure. So, forgiveness. What are my thoughts on forgiveness? And what about people who think forgiveness is?
A lot of people think that forgiveness means that they're agreeing with their abusers. So what would you say to those people about forgiveness? And then what are your thoughts on forgiveness in general?
Gotcha. I would say I'm struggling with the start where I'm just going to start talking, you know, whether this comes across right or not. But I mean, forgiveness, you know, means what you make it mean. You know, forgiveness to me equals understanding. I forgive you for stealing that from the store because I know you never had that toy as a kid and you just really wanted it and you just wanted to experience that. I forgive you for stealing, you know, this food because you're starving and needed something to eat. I forgive you for your violence because I know you grew up in a broken home. I forgive you for being a predator because I realize that the way you came up, that was the only way that existed to be in order to survive. Forgiveness isn't allowing. It's not being okay with it continuing anything. Forgiveness is understanding. I understand that out of the womb, you weren't hardwired to act like this, that you were subject to circumstance of yourself. And during your developmental phase, you went through these things and now you are this person. Forgiveness, I kind of had them go hand in hand. Forgiveness, when I went through what I went through and awakened and realized, oh my God, my life's not what I thought it was. I went through all of this as a kid and I was instantly absolved of my malice, of my violence. Not like I don't have a violent bone in my body, but I no longer had the malice that, I got off on being powerful over the people because that's what I thought that you were supposed to be. That was the same thing as what maybe, people would grow up seeing a love story romantic comedy. My love story romantic comedy was violence, And when I realized what I had been through and how it affected me, and when I realized when I was a kid, when I had to swallow that pain and I couldn't move and I didn't know what to do and there was nothing to do but freeze and have my hands moved and then eventually adopt that behavior by myself, I was healed from it and I understood. I said, oh my God, what have I become? And I understood and I forgave myself. And then when that happened, I didn't ever have to try to forgive my abusers or anything like that because I understood. And I say, look, and you never touch a kid like that. You never. But I understand where you're at and I forgive you. But it has to stop now. What are you going to do? You can forgive them and understand, but you damn sure don't have to allow it. And those things are not equatable in my mind. I just absolutely rebuke and refuse any continuance or allowance or acceptance, but forgiving and understanding of how these things came to be and just, psychology, behavior, these are things you can understand or at least get an idea of. Just like a dog that grew up getting beat eventually snaps back and bites its owner. Well, I forgive that dog because, look, how else was it supposed to act? Is it okay if it bites someone? Of course not. It's just, the dog analogy might not have been the best given the circumstance, but you get it. Forgiveness is understanding to me and nothing but. And what I would focus on long before you try to forgive your abuser or any of that is you need to look within and forgive yourself and accept that. And then through that will come understanding of the external situation. So I strongly believe that before you even think about it, one, if you haven't done the work and you don't remember, you're not going to understand. Don't try to forgive them before you even have reached the memory or said, how are you going to forgive something that you don't know? It's a dicey situation. But again, I look within, focus on myself, focus on understanding and forgiveness myself. The rest comes naturally, in my opinion.
So as far as forgiveness goes, I think I'm pretty much on the same page as Gray, as understanding being the foundation, of forgiveness. My caveat, is that for me, myself, I always had that same sensation that the idea of forgiveness felt detestable, in my healing, and felt like something that I could not wrap my head around because it did feel like I was somehow condoning what I had gone through either to myself or I'd seen done to other people. But really what it came back to for myself, like I said, was because I had mentioned earlier, because I had never, I was trying to forgive too soon. I was trying to essentially forgive without understanding because I had never really allowed myself to feel the emotions of anger and place them where they belonged, which was squarely on the shoulders of the abusers. I'd never allowed myself to really recognize the source of my shame and recognize that it belongs squarely on the shoulders of my abusers. I still was carrying that burden on my back, you know? So trying to forgive something before you're allowed to really feel it and process it, I think is premature, you know? And ultimately, I think it's kind of motivated by this idea, you know, kind of like, you know, Nathan had touched on earlier, that we have this idea, this fantasy of being able, you know, like yes, we can heal with faith, but having this idea that we can essentially skip over some very necessary parts of our healing essentially and just get to the place where everything feels good. You know, I think that's what a lot of people think, is like, okay, I will forgive my abusers, and then all of a sudden everything will feel good and I'll feel okay about what happened. And the thing is, you're never going to feel okay about what happened, and you shouldn't feel okay about what happened. You really shouldn't. You should feel angry, you know, you should feel upset and everything. But for me, what it is you don't get to that understanding until you're able to recognize those emotions. You're able to feel the tragedy, feel the anger and everything, see the situation for what it was, pick it apart to where you're able to see, you know, the parts of the memory that you have to forgive yourself for, you know, because like kind of like Gray was saying, you know, that the self-forgiveness for me too usually is instrumental in any memory first before I can get to even thinking about processing, you know, the what was going on with like the abusers and stuff like that. It really is about dealing with my own self-forgiveness, mainly because most memories, when you're having to perpetrate and everything, that is a place that you have to, you know, that's the total mind. Dealing with those flashbacks is dealing with a part of you that was willing to do heinous and horrible things. And ultimately, in forgiveness of your abusers, you're forgiving the same, you know, the same, you know, a part of a person that was willing to do heinous, horrible things. So for me, I kind of separate it when I look at my abusers. This is how I've learned to approach forgiveness, is that I split my abusers into two, essentially. I see them, as Gray mentioned, as the small child that had no choice in what they endured as a kid and became, you know, that. In AA, it was really eye-opening when I was, you know, in the meeting rooms, and I just felt like I was doing all my system work, and I felt like I could just look around and just see all these wounded little kids, you know, like sitting all around, you know, because that's really anyone's damage comes from their trauma. So for me, it's like I have a heart of forgiveness and love for the infant that my dad once was, for the infant that my handlers once were. You know, I have an attitude of forgiveness and love for those parts in the same way that I have an attitude and forgiveness of love, you know, and love for the parts of myself that I can look back in the memories and see them stabbing another child and realize, you know, that no one would see that scenario and call that child evil. You know, they would see that child as a victim too. So when we can look back, you know, on our memories and recognize, you know, it's with that understanding, there is, yes, a part, you know, and sometimes our abusers are DID too, and though we'll be good moments with them, you know, so we can recognize that there's a part of, you know, this person that was from that core, you know, soul, you know, little part that never deserved what they went through. But when it comes to the adult part of them, to me, I don't feel any need to essentially place forgiveness on that part of them, because what I learned from, you know, essentially the Bible, you know, is just that we, and could be wrong, you know, but that God extends his forgiveness upon us. You know, we get either mercy or justice depending upon our faith in him. So the adult version of our abusers have zero interest in acknowledging that they did anything wrong or asking repentance, either of God or their victims. So until they ask for my forgiveness, I don't feel any need to extend that towards them. I feel a need to extend towards them everything that I would feel if I saw them on the street. I wouldn't look them in the eye and tell them the child part that I see within them is beautiful and whole and stuff like that. I would scream at the top of my legs, "Hey everyone, look, here's a child molester." Because ultimately I feel like they do deserve justice too, you know? And like I had mentioned before, if they are willing at any point to come to me and ask for my forgiveness, acknowledge what they did wrong, say, yes, I did all this, as a kid. Yes, I continue to do it to many kids, you know, in the meantime, you know, and yes, I'm more than willing to admit it publicly. Everything I did, apologize to you and all the victims, and to start, you know, outing all the other people that I know are pedophiles so I can stop another victim from being harmed. On that day, all my abusers I will welcome with arms, you know what I mean? Because that's the place we all have to get to. We've all been put into a position of having to abuse, even if it wasn't, we didn't turn into psychopaths and that wasn't our main selves, you know. It's like we have to get to the place of self-forgiveness, and in doing so, you end up having to learn how to forgive that part of your abusers that was helpless and, you know, and powerless once and everything. But like I said, for me, when I think about the adult version of my abusers, they get the bat, you know. And I feel fine with that, because I do feel like that God is mercy and justice, and I feel like on a certain level that's what us survivors are, that's what us chosen ones are. We're the ones that have woken up are the ones, you know, that are the weapons that get turned on in abusers, you know. And that's ultimately what we have to do. And in my opinion, the real fuel of self-forgiveness and repentance for me is every time I can step out of my comfort zone and do something like this and feel like help even one person by sharing my testimony, the way many other survivors have helped me by sharing their testimonies, you know. So for me, like, forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, is a constant journey and a constant act. I have to do work. I have to do things that show that I am what God made me to be, you know, and that I'm not what they made me to be, you know. And that really, I think, you know, if you can stay focused on doing good works, you know what I mean, it'll keep you grounded, even if you feel like obligated to have some form of forgiveness that you're not capable of right now. On a certain level, maybe it's too soon and you need to stop beating yourself up about it, you know. Get to the level of forgiveness you can, try expressing the anger, and you will probably get there faster than you can imagine, you know. But really also just relying on higher power, you know, relying on God, you know. For me, like Jesus is like, you know, like a savior that has modeled in my life, you know, and through a lot of prayer, how both to forgive myself and to see, you know, see my abusers and with more perspective, you know, and to see my life as something that as a soul I volunteered for on a certain level, you know. And that, you know, that's, if that's what we have to go through, you know, like there's no point staying stuck in like, oh, why did this happen in the past? Like, it sucks, you know what I mean? But I think that's the ultimate goal of forgiveness, is being able to feel like you can move forward. So whatever you need to do that, you know, and you'll get to where you need to over time.
Great answer. Nathan?
I'll jump in as best I can, but my third shift has started. My son is awake. Apparently he has not slept yet tonight, so we'll talk about those little babies, y'all. Yeah, I got one of them right now. Man. Yeah, I think you guys said it very well. I think I misunderstood what forgiveness was required for those that had done these things to me in order for me to get set free, like the keys that open the door to let others free. Hold on, I gotta grab that guy. He's gonna scream.
Oh my goodness. Go ahead, Nathan.
Aww.
Oh my gosh, look at this little angel over here.
This is Big
So
Thunder,
precious.
Abraham.
Look at this little Nathan.
It's gigantic. Don't let him fool you.
He's a little
He's tiny now, but he's
cheap.
gaining on me tremendously.
Yes.
Honestly, yeah. Like, yeah, forgiveness is a key that can help to set you free from the prison cell of bitterness, you know, and that's one we've spent plenty of our lives in. However, I think forgiveness is weaponized in a form of like mandatory, compulsory forgiveness is required in order for us to get healed, is kind of pushed on us, and it's like ridiculous. And the expectation that other people have about being like, you know, I'm obviously in a lot of groups of people that are very much pro be quick to forgive, which is understandable. However, most of them literally cannot understand even an iota of the level of depraved nature of man, what people are literally capable of. And so there's definitely a mixed match a lot of times of trying to forgive and choose as an act of my will to forgive, others. Like I literally say that as a prayer. Like I choose as an act of my will to forgive those who harmed me. That doesn't mean that's like done, you know? That's not some kind of like incantation that makes everything go away. All of the feeling and all of the anguish and the sorrow, the frustration, like that's still there. That's still there, but it doesn't just like it doesn't make it go away. And I think I thought forgiveness was going to be something that happened a lot faster than it did. And that was definitely a major hang up. That was definitely a major hang up for me for a long time, was finding out how can I actually let go of this anger? How can I let go of this frustration and this pain without letting them off the hook of justice? Because I think so much of what I was hoping for was justice to rain down on these people and to give them an opportunity to repent, to turn, you know, like I was like, I gave you ample time. I gave you ample time. Don't you understand? Like I gave you a chance, you know? And it's clear that like for me and my family, at least, they want to participate in the next generation. And that's on them completely. You know what I mean? There's 16 children. There's 16 children. I have 4 of this generational line that are not touched. 16 others are still in that. You know, that sucks. That's a 1-to-4 ratio. It's disgusting. And you know what? That's their reputation. That is absolutely the family business, is to prostitute out little boys like this, to prostitute them out, to literally sell them to the highest bidder, you know? And for me to have the wealth that I'd waited so long for, wealth, like real wealth, phone call wealth, pick up a phone and call anybody wealth. And you know what? I waited a long time for that. And the cost of it was this. And that's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Like, it's ridiculous that you can look at your child with such apathy so as to cut them off. And you know what? I understand they themselves were people that were victims to. I literally, my mom was raised by the absolute psychopath. I get it. But at the end of the day, we have to break the cycle. We have to break the cycle, and we have to be willing to do whatever it takes. And you know what? I'm not the best dad that Naomi and Jubilee and Abraham and Pearl could have out there. I have baggage. I've got brokenness. I am not well a lot of times. And that's horribly difficult. And you know what? At the end of the day, I am striving towards generational improvements. You know, like sobriety has been an incredible helper along the way. Not to say that drugs and alcohol were not helpers along the way. And it's not to say that I am not encouraging that those that are using them to just suddenly stop, because sobriety is its own demon in its own way sometimes. I'll tell you that much. You know, I have a whole lot more forgiveness for people that are doing their utmost to try to break the cycle, because that's ultimately what is required for this to stop. Is not that we have to forgive ourselves. We have to forgive the abusers that harmed us, but that does not mean we have to forget. That does not mean we have to cast off the strangulation cords of justice that are inevitably required for these people to be given what is due to them, because ultimately some of these people will not stop, like that guy I read about, will not stop until their heart stops. Those people need their hearts to stop. We need people who will stop their hearts. I'm actually saying that. Some of these people, their hearts need to be physically stopped for this to stop. It will not turn off until that happens. And if that's the case, do whatever is required. Like for me, we literally lived on the run. We moved anytime we felt like the Ruach, the Holy Spirit gave us an insight. We needed to get out of there. Send us a dream. Send us a gut check in our feeling, like you're talking about earlier, Gray. Like sometimes your guts really do lead you right. You know, anytime that happened, day or night, we would take off. And you know what? Now I'm not mobile. And so kind of that methodology doesn't work as well. And you've got to learn to settle in to finding the ways to overcome those fears that come crawling back in. And you know what? I respect every person who is trying their utmost to get deliverance, to get restoration, just to get a purpose in their life. But to the people that are absolutely committed against this, the people that are trying to silence therapists and get their licenses pulled, the people that are going after employers of survivors, the people that are systemically going in and to the comment section with all their mind control phrases and handle it, the people that are going in and actively on this, they don't deserve an iota of freedom. They have no business living anymore whatsoever, because all they are is chaos magicians. And you know what? We have battled enough confusion in our life for many, many lifetimes. And we need shalom, no chaos, we need peace in our life. And those that are trying to always sow that discord, that subterfuge, that gaslighting, all of this disgusting ad hominem character assassinations, those people need to be held absolutely with their toes to the fire until they burn utterly for their crime.
Anything want to add to that?
Yeah.
If I may, real quick, just clarify, because after listening to Carrie and after listening to Nathan, I 100% agree with some of these people aren't there to be forgiven. Now I'm talking about, okay, forgiveness is understand now. Forgive yourself. Why? You've already repented. That's why you're here and you're going against this. You forgive yourself and you understand how someone could get there in that point in life. But these people, if they're not there in that point in life, they don't get forgiveness. The door is always open. And when they're ready, they'll be welcomed through warmly. And then you can forgive them. There's kind of an innate understanding underlying forgiveness general of humanity and knowing how someone could get there. But if they're not there yet to come back and repent like you are, which is why you forgive yourself, then they don't get the direct forgiveness because they are the problem. And it needs to be stopped by any means necessary. And that's what we're here for, to be cycle breakers, to stop it. We repent and forgive ourselves. But yeah, someone that's active, there is no forgiveness. There, right? I mean, unfortunately. So yeah, anyways, that's the number one. If they're still doing it, there is no forgiveness for them other than maybe perhaps an underlying understanding forgiveness. But yeah, it's got to stop. There is no forgiving someone that's still abusing.
Anybody else have anything to say on that? No? This was amazing.
Seems like a great way to end it.
Yeah, this is phenomenal. It is so neat having all three of you here. I've known all of you off screen and you guys have all interviewed with me, and I know you guys know each other to some level, but getting to hear how many parallels you guys have, it's like the same story, different book in a sense, and you all validate each other so much, and you're validating the people listening while educating at the same time and giving these really amazing perspectives that were so individualized to you, even though they had so many similarities to other people, and it's going to be things like this that open up people's eyes to this really happening, when there's people from all over the world that have the same story with different details, that don't know each other, never knew each other, and somehow are divulging the same systemic, abuse and information that somebody else has, so I really, really appreciate you guys coming on. This is incredible. I can't wait to do this more with you guys. And I'd love if you guys went around and told people where they can connect with you on social media. Whoever wants to start first can go ahead. Carrie?
Oh, sure. So I mean, for me, the best place is just the YouTube channel that I have right now. So, like Nathan's showing, like family life is a little difficult to post things as often as I would like to, but it's in the works and we're just beginning, so I was gonna say, I don't know, it's called Desert Dakini, a survivor's perspective, but it might be at my name, so Carrie, CarrieOlaje at Carrie Olaje. So that's the best place to connect with me with anything survivor related.
And that is your handle is Carrie Olaje, and that's the name of your channel is Desert Dakini, a survivor's perspective. So yes. Gray?
I got too much going on and I don't always conduct myself to the level that I would like to. So let's just say, go to my YouTube. It's Gray Area Operator on YouTube, and the channel name is The Gray Area. Oh, thank you.
Nathan?
Yeah, you guys can go to snatchedfromtheflames.com. That's my website. I've got a Rumble, which is the Linen Railroad, chugga chugga chugga, and youtube.com/Nathan Reynolds, or the Linen Railroad will get you there. And I've got a TikTok that's Snatched from the Flames. I got a Spreaker. My audiobook is on there. If you look up Snatched from the Flames, I've got the audiobook around everywhere. You guys can have it for free. It's on the description of every one of my YouTube channels. My ebook is also there for download. Black Awakening may be there for download. All kinds of stuff. Treasures, pearls, ABCs of DID is on there. I've got all kinds of stuff in there. I got all kinds of goodie bags for downloads for those that are interested in there. But thank you so much for having me on. This was absolutely marvelous. You guys are champions.
You guys
That
are
was
all
amazing.
listeners. Does anybody have any
appreciate y'all.
closing words? You're like, no, we're talked out.
Love y'all.
Well, I love all of you. Everybody, I'm going to have all of their information in the show notes. So whether you're on Spotify, iTunes, BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, wherever you're at, go in the show notes. Great. You'll see hyperlinks just lit up for you. Go ahead and just click them. Go connect with all these amazing individuals. They are just absolutely phenomenal. They're the ones out there making changes in the world. They're the ones out there doing it first, divulging the hardest things in their life so we can hopefully stop this from continuing and educate you on the other side on the truth of our world. So please go support them, get your eyes on them. I'm going to have all of their information in the show notes. Follow all of my information also. I'll have all my social links down there as well. I would love your support. Go connect with us on every platform you can. We never know, what we're going to be on today and what we, might get terminated on tomorrow. So follow us across multiple platforms so you can stay in touch. You guys are awesome. We couldn't do this without you. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.